She especially enjoyed immersing herself in the worlds of novels where the main character was like a bright ray of sunshine, kind, insightful, and courageous, surrounded by the attention, care, and support of a noble, fair, and incredibly charming protagonist. She dreamily read stories in which she encountered a deposed northern prince with a piercing gaze, long black hair like a raven's wing, and a stern appearance wrapped in a warm fur cape, hiding his pain and former greatness. In the most touching endings of these books, the heroine, having overcome many trials, found love, embraced the prince, her beloved, and full of joy, stood with him at sunset, bound to him by the bonds of marriage and quiet, long-awaited happiness. However, that day, while reading a new book, the girl sitting in the school library suddenly froze and felt a chill run down her spine when she realized that the ideal hero was not a kind, handsome man at all, but a hidden villain with dark intentions. And then an unexpected thought came to her. Why not try writing a novel herself? And settling down at her school desk, she twirled a pen in her fingers for 5 or 6 minutes, smiling and thinking about what phrase would be best to begin the magical story. Frowning seriously and staring at her notebook, she thought that she should start writing the novel as soon as possible because 5 or 6 images were born in her head at once, and each of them threatened to disappear if she did not catch inspiration at the right moment. The school atmosphere was all around her, the usual noise. Conversations were heard everywhere, chairs creaked, pens clicked, and footsteps in the hallway. A problem was being explained at the board, and in the last 5 or 6 seconds, she had devised a scene suitable for the climax of a novel. And suddenly, as if hearing the call of her subconscious, she turned around sharply, adjusting her glasses and looking at her classmate, whose face flashed through her thoughts at least 5 or 6 times, and involuntarily became an inspiration for the heroes of her as yet unwritten book. There, a few rows away, a blond guy with a dazzling smile sat on a desk, chatting with his 5 or 6 friends, laughing infectiously and freely. It was he who became for her the prototype of the main character of her future novel, as if he had come from the pages of a dream. Just by looking at such a handsome man with perfect features, light hair like sunbeams, and a look that made your heart beat faster, she could come up with an entire setting full of magic, great romance and drama in 5 or 6 seconds. That is why, watching him from the side, the girl involuntarily pressed her hand to her lips, holding back a joyful smile, feeling a warm excitement in her chest, because in front of her sat none other than the main guy of the school, and at the same time the main character of her fictional world. Having collected her thoughts and already preparing to put the first 5 or 6 lines into her notebook, she reached for a pen to start writing, but then suddenly noticed with slight disappointment that there was not a single blank sheet of paper on her desk. These were her annoying and mischievous classmates, about 4, 5, or even 6 people who approached her desk with mocking looks, abruptly grabbed her notebook and stared at her as if they were about to expose the secret of an entire novel. When one of the girls asked a sarcastic question about whether she had written any indecent stories while looking at Shinara and the other guys for so long, the girl, pale with excitement, jumped up from her seat and indignantly declared that this was complete nonsense and speculation. She frowned when one of her classmates laughingly said that if there was nothing forbidden in her notes, then she wouldn't mind if 4, 5, or even 6 people just went and read everything right in front of her. Without waiting for either consent or refusal from her, these 4 or 5 impudent schoolchildren immediately began to read her notebook out loud, commenting on each line and laughing loudly, saying that the main character's name sounded stupid, especially if you repeated it 5 or 6 times. A strange hand suddenly and swiftly reached out to her desk next to her, deftly and without hesitation grabbed several sheets of paper with her rough sketches, snatching the secret right from under her hand, not leaving the girl even a chance to say anything or have time to react. In front of her stood none other than the most handsome guy in the entire school. That same blonde guy with the perfect smile and shining eyes, and without saying a word, he lifted the notebook with 2 fingers, like a royal decree, carefully examining each page. It was Han Sunyi, the school's notorious heartthrob and enviable handsome man, who looked at the girls with a cheeky grin, as if he knew all their secrets, and at that moment he looked like a real prince from a romantic fairy tale, confident in himself and his charm. A lively and slightly tense conversation immediately broke out among the assembled students. They excitedly discussed why exactly one girl had taken the notebook from another, what was written there, and for what purpose she had started writing her new novel in the first place. When Shinara was suddenly asked an unexpected and almost provocative question about whether she really was the real author of this strange, chaotic, and perhaps too frank outline of a future novel, she visibly hesitated, as if she had been caught off guard and deprived of self-confidence. Han Sunyi, not hiding his inner confusion and slight bewilderment, squinted at its written pages, trying to at least slightly understand the meaning of what was written, having come across an excessively long title, overloaded with epithets about ladies, knights, an ancient era, and forgotten lords. He paused for a moment, as if considering whether to say anything at all or just remain silent, and then silently, almost with respect and slight excitement, returned the notebook to its rightful owner, carefully placing it on the desk in front of the girl, casting a short but attentive and warm glance. Finally, having collected his thoughts and paused, he calmly stood in front of her and, trying to speak softly, friendly, and without the slightest condemnation, said that he had not read her novel at all, so that she would not worry, but at the same time added that he still had one important condition for her. Looking at her with a slight smile and a warm gaze, Han Sunyi told her to be sure to let him know when she finally finished writing her long-awaited novel, because he sincerely wanted to know how her creative work and the fate of the characters would end. In complete shock, Shin Ara's mouth dropped open in surprise when she learned that her prototype protagonist, the person she trusted, was actually planning to blackmail her in the future when she became a famous and recognized author, causing her to have a storm of conflicting feelings. After that, the guy, as if not wanting to give anything away, quickly headed to the group of popular classmates, quietly asking them not to tell others under any circumstances that he was supposedly friends with the nerd, because for him it was a personal and very important secret that he did not want to reveal to anyone. Shin Ara herself, feeling warmth and tenderness inside, hit her heart hard with her hand, because she was sincerely glad that the young man called her a friend, because before they really were inseparable childhood friends, which brought back pleasant memories for her. The young man was born as an ideal of beauty and perfection, attracting glances with his impeccable, striking appearance and natural charm, always remaining the best in everything he did, causing sincere admiration in those around him and secret admiration in herself. Moreover, for a long time he always behaved with her in an exceptionally friendly, warm, and attentive manner, more than once asking students to help his friend from the class, showing care, sincere participation, and kindness, which sometimes seemed especially touching and important to her. Covering her mouth with her hand to hide her sudden confusion, shyness, and wave of feelings, she wondered if she should finally open up and confess to her childhood friend the feelings that had long lived in her heart and quietly blossomed with each new day of their shared communication and tender memories. Not understanding what was happening, Han Sunyi suddenly stopped, turned around sharply, hearing strange, disturbing, and mysterious sounds that broke the silence and made him wary, as if something important, unusual, and possibly dangerous was happening very close by. Putting his hand on his neck, he slowly stood next to his classmates at the corridor and thought about how he seemed to see a strange, cold, and piercing gaze, as if someone was looking intently straight at his back. And this feeling of anxiety, mistrust, and confusion did not leave him for a minute. Shin Ara herself was quietly crying at her desk, overcome with deep sadness, uncertainty, and pain, because even if she openly confessed her sincere love to the guy, she was afraid that he would certainly refuse her, leaving her with a broken heart and painful disappointment in her soul. Having carefully covered the notebook on the desk, the girl clearly understood and humbly accepted that she was not a beauty, did not shine with her appearance, could not boast of the best grades in the class, but her soul still sincerely reached out to something more, to bright dreams and bright hopes. Looking at the blue, rather crumpled notebook, the lady realized with deep pain and quiet sadness that she was not capable of anything, feeling like a failure, lost and alone in a huge cold world where dreams seemed so unattainable, fragile and far away. When suddenly she sharply remembered the guy's words about her story, she stopped, frowned, and looked thoughtfully at the sheet of paper for a long time, as if trying to find in it a deep answer to the questions that had been tormenting her for a long time, which did not give her peace and did not let go of her soul, tormenting her heart. Several years passed. They flew by serenely and quickly. The sky, houses, and the city changed, but the memories and feelings associated with that time remained in her heart, like a gentle but bright and living trace, reminiscent of the past and unfulfilled hopes that still warm the soul. Shin-ara was truly happy and sincerely excited when her manager announced to her the joyful and long-awaited news. They had finally decided to publish her first novel, and sitting on the phone, he shared this important news, supporting and inspiring the girl to new creative achievements and feats. But when the conversation turned to the next, new novel, the girl seemed to freeze in place, hanging her head and immersed in dark and disturbing thoughts because she could not even think about it. Fear, doubt, and uncertainty fettered her soul, not allowing her to believe in her strength and dreams. The laptop screen in front of her remained completely blank, as if blocked and mute, not allowing even the boldest and brightest thought to break through to the surface, so that even one line or even a drop of inspiration for a new work and future success would be born. The manager carefully and delicately suggested that if she had not yet decided on the concept of the next main character, then she could take an existing character who was well known to readers and could add freshness, intrigue, and new emotions to the plot of the novel. Horrified and confused, the girl froze in place when she was asked to embody the image of a bad boy in the role of the main man in the new novel, a character with a dark charisma and a complex character that contradicted all her previous ideas about a romantic story and love. The producer, showing understanding, patience, and support, asked to work carefully and attentively on the novel before its release, paying attention to every detail so that the work would become truly high-quality, interesting, and attract a wide audience of readers. In her debut novel, which the girl had been working on since her school days, everything was simple, familiar, and predictable. A good guy was the main character, and the girl was unrequited love, which now seemed too banal and superficial for adult serious literature. She clearly remembered the boy shouting loudly at her to come down quickly, assuring her that he was ready to catch her if she suddenly fell from such a height. His voice was filled with anxiety and care in a childish spontaneity, as if a fifth angel was protecting her. Shin-ara felt sweat break out on her forehead from fear, and she was afraid to jump, because she was sitting high on the ledge of the building, and the wind played with her hair, making her heart beat faster. Every moment seemed like a test of courage, as if 5 minutes lasted an eternity. The boy kept scolding her, calling her stupid and reckless for climbing so high, as if trying to reach the stars, although he himself was full of anxiety and wanted to protect her from possible danger and falling, as if the fifth step of danger was already close. When the girl finally decided to jump down, she unexpectedly collided heads with the guy, and a sharp, piercing pain instantly engulfed both of them, causing them to freeze for a moment from the suddenness and unpleasant sensations that filled their hearts. She described the same exciting fall in her novel, where the handsome prince caught the ideal lady in his arms, as if saving her from danger, and their meeting was filled with tenderness and trepidation that could touch even the most callous reader. But the real problem arose in something completely different. When Shin-ara entrusted the novel to her former friend, who had grown up and changed, to read, she did not expect that he would remember the old request that she once, back in high school, asked him to fulfill. Smiling awkwardly, the handsome Han-sunyi said that he had completely forgotten about the time in high school when he asked her to let him read her novel as soon as she finished it, and now, after some time, he reminded her of this event with a little irony. And so, sitting at the computer, the girl could not stand it and burst into tears from grief and pain, because her unrequited love refused to read her book, as if rejecting a part of her, leaving her heart broken and her soul in confusion, like a fifth wound on her fragile and tender soul. Sitting at the table, The lady was deeply upset that all this time she had worked hard, putting her strength and soul into her business, and her secret lover did not even appreciate these efforts, leaving her alone with unspoken feelings and resentment, as if a fifth shadow was haunting her. Suddenly the phone rang, interrupting her thoughts and sadness, and the producer persistently asked about the draft of the new book, reminding her that the deadline was already looming, and from this reminder the girl's heart began to beat faster, as if a fifth lightning bolt had pierced her consciousness. Clenching her fists in front of her, Shin Ara resolutely told herself that now was not the time to be gloomy and depressed, because it was time to gather her strength and write a new novel that could touch the hearts of many readers and change her life, as if a fifth thread of inspiration was leading her forward. The corner store was dimly lit. Mysterious silhouettes were flickering in the darkness outside the windows, and this mystical atmosphere added a special charm to the streets, making Shin Ara walk forward, thinking about who to make the main character of her future book, as if a fifth star was guiding her thoughts. Shin Ara walked down the street, wondering how to choose the image of the main character. Perhaps it will be a girl in a light dress and glasses, whose story is filled with drama, secrets, and unexpected turns, reflecting the internal struggle, dreams, and the fifth shade of her soul. Suddenly, she heard loud, tense screams coming from around the corner, and moving closer, she looked out to see what was going on. There was a couple arguing in rage, each of them full of emotion and inner fire, as if the fifth act of a drama was unfolding before her. The girl was screaming at the guy, who stood with his face covered by his hand and listened silently, as if trying to cope with his own pain, hiding it deep inside, and not letting the emotions break out, despite all the heaviness of this passionate and difficult moment. After these harsh words, the woman could not stand it, and sharply slapped the man, loudly shouting that if he did not want to date her sincerely and honestly from the very beginning, then why did he start their relationship, as if throwing out all the accumulated pain and disappointment. With tears in her eyes, she suddenly rushed away, quickly walking away down the deserted street, cursing loudly and accusing her ex-lover of cruelly abandoning her and leaving her alone in a world full of deception and broken hopes, as if her heart was breaking into pieces. With curiosity and quiet anxiety, Shin Ara watched this tense scene that captured her attention and interest, and she quickly realized that she had become an unwitting witness to someone else's painful separation, filled with bitterness and resentment, like the fifth act of a dramatic performance. The man was left standing alone in the darkness of the narrow passage, covering his face with his hand, trying to hide from those around him the full depth of his inner pain and confusion, as if the shadow of loneliness had wrapped around his shoulders, leaving him alone with heavy thoughts and memories. Suddenly, the man turned sharply and cast an angry, penetrating glance at the young Shin Ara, instantly realizing that she had been watching them from the shadows all this time, as if revealing the secret that she had tried to hide under the cover of night and her timidity. Shin Ara, holding a bag in her hands, stood awkwardly in fear, trying to hide her excitement and embarrassment, an awkward smile frozen on her face, which only emphasized her confusion and desire to avoid an unwanted conflict, as if she was caught off guard. To the stranger's sharp question as to why she had been following them, the lady answered quickly and embarrassedly that it had all happened by accident, as if trying to justify her presence and avoid suspicions that could ruin her peace and cause even greater awkwardness. The boy was clearly angry, his eyes flashing with anger, and he asked sharply, almost growling, if she had been peeping at them on purpose, which made Shin Ara recoil, raising her hands up in a gesture of complete confession and showing everyone that she was completely innocent and did not wish any harm to anyone. When the girl first saw this guy's face up close, she froze for a moment, struck by his beauty, which seemed to illuminate her heart and make her forget about fear, causing an unusual feeling of admiration and a slight tremor in her chest. The guy looked strong and confident, with piercing gray eyes, black hair, expressive features, and a blue t-shirt, and then suddenly he said that he was the one who got hit, because he was the perfect prototype of the bad boy for her novel, causing Shin Ara to admire him. Shin Ara was so amazed by this thought that she literally opened her mouth in surprise, because she realized that this guy would become the inspiration for the image of the main character of her book, as if fate had given her a sign, and now her novel was acquiring a living face and soul. The guy looked down at her with incomprehension, as if trying to figure out why the beauty was looking so intently at him, because for him it was unexpected and a little embarrassing attention that she showed without warning. Without thinking twice, Shin Ara cried out decisively, begging the guy to help her, because she felt that he would be the one who could breathe life into her story, and his charisma and history would become the main driving force of her creativity, opening up new horizons. The man was clearly impressed and intrigued to learn that Shin Ara was a writer who created worlds out of words and experiences, because for him it opened the door to a different, creative and mysterious world, full of fantasies and deep stories that he had not been interested in before. With a keen interest and a slight smile, he began asking questions about what books she wrote, what genres she preferred, and what stories filled the pages of her novels, as if trying to better understand the woman who was able to find inspiration in him to create an image. With her hands folded in front of her in a gesture of shyness and awkwardness, Shin Ara admitted that writing her novel was very difficult, as it required a lot of effort and patience, and that he was the desired prototype for her main character, but at the same time she was afraid that her words could be misunderstood. Hearing her compare him to a bad guy with a terrible character, the man suddenly recoiled, irritation and resentment appearing on his face because such words seemed rude and unfair to him, as if she had judged him too harshly without knowing his whole story. But Shin Ara, as if not noticing his irritation and deep resentment, continued to insist that he was the perfect villain and the epitome of a bad boy, unaware that her words had hurt his heart and soul much deeper than she could have imagined. Grimly realizing that the girl was probably making fun of him or not taking him seriously, the guy coldly and decisively refused to help, not wanting to become a participant in her game, because trust was lost, and patience was completely exhausted at this very moment when he needed sincere support. Raising his hand, he said with despair and irritation in his voice that he saw no benefit in helping her, and that his help was absolutely useless to her, as if closing the door in front of her and leaving her alone with her own doubts and fears, immersed in a creative crisis. Shin Ara herself, looking at him longer and longer, became more and more inspired with each passing moment, feeling that it was in this man that the spark was hidden that could ignite the flame of her romance and give the heroes a living soul and a unique character, as if fate itself had brought her to this moment. But he suddenly shuddered when the girl grabbed his hands tightly and began to beg for help, her eyes sparkling with hope and determination, and the blush on her cheeks gave her plea a special sincerity and touching tenderness that could not leave him indifferent. With a timid smile and a sparkle in her eyes, Shin Ara offered to pay him for his help, realizing that any compromise could bring her closer to her cherished goal, because her novel required living inspiration, and he could become the main source of her creative impulse and energy. However, the man remained adamant, not giving in to the offer, abruptly pulled his hand out of her grip, and thereby showed that he was not ready to make concessions or make deals for the sake of temporary gain, because it was more important for him to preserve his own dignity and inner freedom. After that, he placed his hand next to her, pressing her against the wall with unexpected gentleness, apologized to her for his harshness, and immediately asked with interest whether she wrote books in the romance genre, as if trying to understand how seriously she took her work and how deeply immersed she was in the world of her characters. With red cheeks and obvious embarrassment, the lovely Shin Ara quietly and timidly responded, "Yes," feeling her heart beat faster with excitement and awkwardness, as if she was about to reveal the secrets of her soul to this stranger, hoping for support and understanding. However, suddenly the guy's mood changed from kindness to anger, and he said with cold severity that, in his opinion, she had probably lost touch with reality, and if she continued to behave so strangely and unpredictably, he did not rule out the possibility of calling the police. As a result, the girl was rudely and sharply rejected, left alone in the middle of the street with a broken mood and a feeling of bitterness, as if the whole world had turned away from her at the most inopportune moment when she so desperately needed support and the warmth of human participation. Back home, Shin Ara, depressed and tired, sat down at her laptop and sadly rested her head on her hands, looking at the screen where the outlines of her novel were. thinking about how difficult it can be to find inspiration in moments of loneliness and heartache, but still deciding not to give up. To herself that she had always been extremely curious about what exactly this ideal bad boy should be like, this type that inspired her to create a protagonist filled with complexities and contradictions, like a reflection of life itself. Now she clearly understood that the stranger was a handsome, rough, and strong man, in whom anger and resentment were combined at the same time, and it was this mixture of feelings and character that made him so attractive and mysterious for her creative imagination, like a living prototype of her novel. Having started aggressively typing on the keyboard, the girl decided that she would be able to figure out all the details and nuances of her novel herself, without any help from the outside, because it is the independent search and internal experience that make the work truly sincere and deep. Clutching her head from exhaustion and tension, she suddenly realized that what she had written was actually a reflection of yesterday's meeting with that man, as if her subconscious itself had told a story that she had not yet fully realized. Suddenly, her phone rang again, and on the other end of the line was the voice of the editor, who was once again contacting her to discuss important news and make adjustments to her plans, causing her to jump in surprise and focus on the tasks ahead. The manager listened in complete shock and anxiety to the horrific story that her writer had suddenly had a serious accident, which meant that she would now be unable to finish the novel on time, putting everyone in an extremely difficult situation and causing a lot of worry. The female manager was deeply concerned about the fate of the project and offered to visit the victim to support and help her, but Shin Ara refused with determination, not wanting to be distracted from her plans despite the difficult situation and the feeling of guilt that she would not be able to fulfill all her obligations on time. There was a calendar on the table, open to April, with dates reminding of approaching deadlines and the need to urgently change plans. And it was this realization that made the manager realize with horror that he would have to rearrange his entire work schedule due to unforeseen circumstances related to the writer's accident. At the most tense moment, a man in an elegant blue pantsuit suddenly appeared behind her, whose appearance added even more mystery and intrigue to this already tense atmosphere, as if fate had decided to intervene in the course of events in the most unexpected way. It was the director, strict and attentive, who asked in a reserved manner what exactly had happened to that handsome man, showing genuine interest and a desire to understand the situation in order to make the right decisions in the circumstances. He listened carefully as it became known that one of the authors had unexpectedly suffered a serious accident that threatened the completion date of her work and required immediate action to adjust all plans and obligations of the publishing house. He was genuinely upset to realize that he would have to shift all the release dates of books and other materials, but his subordinate quickly noted that the author would need several weeks, namely about a month, to recover and spend time in the hospital, which would ultimately affect the entire production process. Holding the phone in his hand, the man said with slight irony that it was quite funny and ridiculous to hear that the writer had not been seriously injured, and then it was unclear how she had to lie in the hospital for a whole month, causing everyone to be perplexed. The director persistently, with a hint of demand, asked the lady for the phone number of that very author, and she, embarrassed and confused, reluctantly but nevertheless provided this contact, feeling pressure and internal discomfort because of what was happening around her. The man replied gloomily and sternly that he intended to personally find out whether the girl was really undergoing long-term treatment, and if it turned out that this was just a made-up lie, then he would decisively force her to end the affair, without accepting any excuses or justifications. At the same time, Shin Ara, with a feeling of inner shame and remorse, mentally asked the producer for forgiveness for her lie, realizing that honesty in such situations would be much wiser and more correct for everyone involved in order to avoid unnecessary problems and conflicts. Before starting to write her new novel, the lady decided to carefully study many books dedicated to complex and mysterious bad boy characters in order to get inspiration and add depth to the main character in her work, filled with drama and passion. Her phone was loaded with a variety of apps, each containing unique collections of literature and useful materials that would help broaden her horizons and understanding of the typical character traits inherent in such controversial and attractive heroes in the modern world. She found herself in a cozy cafe with a modern interior, where people sat at small tables enjoying the atmosphere and quiet conversations, and stylish design elements emphasized the comfort and sophistication of this place, creating a special mood and inspiring new thoughts. Suddenly, she was invited to join the table by a former school friend who appeared with her new companion, creating a slight tension and a nostalgic feeling of a meeting filled with memories, emotions, and hopes for change. In addition, her former secret lover was nearby, who, noticing her, warmly invited her to sit next to him, as if wanting to renew the former closeness and return the lost connection, adding notes of mystery, awe, and secret desires to this meeting. Suddenly, a former classmate, smiling and slightly teasing, spoke with a hint of irony, saying that it was so natural and predictable that Shin Ara would end up becoming a writer, because at school she would sit all the time, immersed in her notebooks and notes, as if in her own world. Shin Ara laughed heartily in response, noting that it was these school notes and observations that she then used as the basis and inspiration for her first novel, which allowed her to express the thoughts and feelings accumulated over many years of youthful experiences. Together they ordered a variety of drinks in the cafe, enjoying their taste and aroma, and gradually, relaxing in the cozy atmosphere, they began to have a leisurely conversation, trying to restore old connections and remember common moments from the past. However, Shin Ara herself felt alienated and could not really communicate with them, since they had no common topics, so she sat sadly opposite, immersed in her thoughts and inner melancholy, as if she found herself in an alien world. With a feeling of incomprehension and slight confusion, she stared at her former secret lover, trying to understand why he had invited her here at all and what purpose he was pursuing, because his motives seemed completely unclear and mysterious to her. Taking the bottle, Shin Ara carefully poured herself another glass, internally deciding that after this sip, she would gather her strength and finally leave this cozy but stuffy place where the weight of fatigue was pulling her down and preventing her from concentrating on the present moment. As Shin Ara drifted off to sleep, she sat at the table, slowly closing her eyelids, feeling how a light drowsiness gradually enveloped her consciousness like a soft and warm blanket, causing everything around her to blur, and it was at this moment that she had to fight the desire to finally fall asleep. Suddenly the girl opened her eyes sharply, feeling that someone was sitting quietly next to her, and her gaze fell on Han Sunyi, who was smiling calmly and typing something on his phone, as if he was ready to support her at any moment, and suddenly remind her of the reality that she needed to return to. The guy smiled, noticing that the girl had finally woken up, and this warm smile, full of tenderness and slight surprise, seemed to say that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time, knowing how important it was for her to reconnect with the outside world and leave sleep behind. The maiden slowly turned around, trying to find her glasses, and was surprised to see them neatly in the hands of Han Sunyi, who had taken them off so that she could rest more comfortably and fall asleep, showing concern even in the most delicate little things, which touched her heart. Shin Ara hurried to put her glasses back on, apologizing to the guy for unexpectedly falling asleep right on his shoulder, feeling both awkward and grateful for his patience and understanding at this difficult moment for her, when fatigue took over her will. The guy smiled kindly and quietly said that he understood how difficult it was with deadlines and constant pressure, especially for an author like her, and that she could always rely on his support and help, without fear of being misunderstood or left alone in the creative world. The writer, feeling the warmth and sincerity in his words, nodded shyly in response and softly agreed, allowing herself for the first time in a long time to feel relief and support, next to someone who truly understood her inner experiences and fears. Her former classmate watched silently as Han Sunyi tenderly courted Shin Ara, offering her a glass of water and showing concern that seemed to surprise everyone around her, as no one expected such warmth from a guy known for his reserve and mystery. Suddenly, someone in the room loudly remarked that the young man and woman seemed to have never known each other since high school, causing a wave of whispers and gossip among the guests, who were curiously watching this unexpected scene, trying to understand their story. The woman with long brown hair leaned forward with genuine interest and a slight smile as she asked the couple what kind of relationship they had had in the past, trying to stir their memories and understand how deep their connection had been over the years. Shin Ara, taken aback by the unexpected question, hesitated and choked for a moment, trying to find her words, while Han Sunyi smiled and frowned slightly, gently noting that it was perhaps none of her business, demonstrating a desire to keep some details a secret. In response, the woman calmly noted that the guy seemed to always show concern for his classmate, despite the fact that, apparently, they were hardly a couple during their school years, which added even more mystery and intrigue to their current relationship, making everyone wonder about their true feelings. Shin Ara, slightly embarrassed but with a warm smile, replied that there had never been anything romantic between them. They had simply remained childhood friends who shared common memories and support, nothing more, as if an invisible thread connected their destinies. However, Han Sunyi reacted much more lively, unexpectedly laughing loudly and making fun of the suggestion that he was supposedly in love with a nerdy classmate, as if playing with memories and trying to lighten the mood with light humor, causing smiles from those around him. With a smile and a bit of irony, the man confidently stated that Shin Ara was just an old childhood friend to him, nothing more, and emphasized that their families knew each other and were friends even before they were born, creating a solid foundation for their long friendship. After gently placing his hand on the young girl's shoulder, he quietly added that he had recently met her mother by chance, who had asked him to take her with him because her daughter was too withdrawn and not inclined to communicate with others. On the table in front of them lay neatly arranged plates with a variety of delicious snacks, which, with their aroma and appearance, invited everyone to taste these exquisite dishes, promising a pleasant and warm feast in a friendly atmosphere. The people sitting opposite were close friends who were animatedly discussing with sincere smiles that they had all once been madly in love with the handsome Han Sunyi, and this topic brought back both nostalgia and warm memories of those distant times. Having finished her story and slapping her palms on the table with determination, the girl loudly and passionately exclaimed that she never loved the blonde again, and in her heart there was not a drop of the former feelings that once seemed so strong and real. Suddenly, Han Sunyi, with a light and mysterious smile on his face, calmly said that it was precisely because he had rejected her back then that they now had the opportunity to remain true friends and calmly date without the previous complications and misunderstandings. His close friends, amazed and in some deep bewilderment, stared at him, thinking that the guy was starting to say completely absurd, strange things, so unexpected and confusing did their words seem, as if he had lost touch with reality and ceased to understand himself. With an expression of genuine interest and slight anxiety on her face, the girl suddenly asked the blonde if he really seriously intended to never date anyone else for the rest of his life unless he found someone who would completely conquer his heart and soul. The young man slowly and thoughtfully placed his hand on his chin, as if trying to find the right words, and then calmly said that when he meets that one, the one and only, the one who awakens true feelings in him, then he will start dating. Shin Ara herself clenched her fists, hiding them under her straw cape, and thought with pain in her heart that Han Sunyi had never seen her as a girl capable of being his lover, but only as a distant shadow, and this tormented her soul immensely. However, a warm wave of relief swept through her that she hadn't confessed her feelings to Han Sunyi earlier, because otherwise he might have stopped all communication with her, afraid of the awkwardness, tension, and uncertainty between them. On the face of young Shin Ara, she was especially bitter from the realization that the guy did not understand a hint or a shade in her words, in which a tender, trembling, and sincere love was invisibly hidden, bursting to get out. Clutching her head and falling helplessly to her knees, the young Shin Ara couldn't decide if she had done the right thing by hiding her deep feelings. Everything was mixed up in her mind, her head was spinning, as if her mind and heart were fighting each other in a furious silence. When suddenly Han Sunyi cast an attentive and slightly thoughtful glance at her, as if he had suddenly remembered something important, and with a warm, almost playful smile on his lips, in which one could feel a slight mockery, he asked the maiden what the title of her mysterious book was. Turning over her shoulder and trying to maintain an outward calm, Shin-ara answered briefly, almost indifferently, as if in passing, that it was completely unimportant, as if she was trying to hide behind dry words the ever-growing excitement that was once again burning her from within. Her former classmate, standing nearby with a phone in her hands, watched their unexpected interaction attentively, albeit silently, holding back a slight half-smile, as if reading between the lines and trying to understand what was really happening between them. And then, looking at how they were carefreely joking, smiling, and seemed to have become children again, she suddenly declared with slight inspiration that she seemed to have guessed what book they were talking about. Of course, about The Secret Love of a Childhood Friend. Touching and warm. Shin-ara, overcome with intense emotion and ardent rage, could not contain her sudden surge of feelings when, with a degree of solemn excitement, the title of her book was announced, which caused a storm of passionate feelings, deep sadness and unquenchable pain in her soul, penetrating every cell of her being. Han-sunyi, clearly embarrassed and somewhat at a loss, said with pitiful awkwardness and mixed feelings that the title chosen for the book seemed to him unusually strange and extremely inappropriate, instantly plunging him into a state of timid embarrassment that was reflected in every timid word he uttered. When he began to carefully search for this mysterious and disputed book on the internet, Shin-ara suddenly, with decisive thoroughness, snatched his phone from his hands, and the guy immediately began to violently protest, emitting sharp and deafening cries filled with surprise and indignation. Without wasting a second and without showing the slightest doubt or hesitation, she quickly set about deleting his entire browser history, trying to erase every trace that could reveal her secrets or harm her privacy. After this, smoothly approaching with an expression of severe malice and deep hostility in her eyes, she with firm determination and without the slightest hesitation warned him that he should under no circumstances dare to read her book, declaring in advance the inevitable and grave consequences. With a firm, almost frightening determination and suppressed inner tension, she said that he would definitely, and without any exceptions, regret it if he even tried to read her book. And Han-sunyi, confused and filled with anxiety, whispered that he understood and realized everything. Without waiting for a word or even the slightest movement from him, Shin-ara turned around abruptly, throwing out a dry phrase about how it was supposedly high time for her to return home, and with a proud posture, stubbornly pressing her lips, she headed away, hiding the storm inside herself. Her breathing became ragged, her chest felt heavy as Shin-ara, exhaling tiredly and rubbing her temples, walked out of the building and down the dark street, where the dim light of the street lamps cast long, uneven shadows, making the evening seem anxious and endless. Not far from the entrance, by the concrete wall, stood a guy in a light cap, familiar to her as a friend of a former classmate, a person with whom she had almost no communication, but who, it seemed, simply decided to get some air and leave the noisy room for a while. As soon as she approached, the man slightly bowed his head, looked sideways, smiled slyly, and, as if he had been planning this conversation for a long time, said with cold politeness that he had one thing, one story, which she definitely should listen to until the end. A man with thick, dark hair sat quietly at the long bar counter, carefully observing those around him, and the bartender, hearing his voice, quietly discussed him with another employee, sharing details, as if he had known him for a long time and knew a lot about his life. On the table in front of the man, exquisite dishes were neatly laid out, fresh pasta with a fragrant sauce, a glass of red wine, a variety of seafood and thinly sliced cold cuts, which attracted attention with their appetizing appearance and filled the room with an exquisite aroma. The puzzled man, looking at his old friend, quietly said that he had been looking extremely depressed and sick lately, as if something was really bothering his soul, and added that he had heard that he had recently broken up with his girlfriend, which could possibly be the reason for this state. The director of a large and influential company, who happened to be nearby, noticed their conversation and curiously asked the bartender how he had learned such personal details about the guests, causing bewilderment and at the same time interest among the surrounding patrons of the establishment. The guy calmly replied that his ex-girlfriend worked in this very restaurant, so he knew about many of the details, which obviously surprised the man in the suit, making him think about how closely their destinies and lives were intertwined. They continued their conversation, trying to understand why the young man was dating that girl at all, if, according to him, he was not interested in a serious relationship, and especially in marriage, which seemed rather strange and even a little offensive to everyone around him. Taking a glass of rich red wine and taking a small sip, the guy admitted with bitterness in his voice that his parents constantly insisted and convinced him to find a worthy wife, emphasizing the importance of traditions and family expectations. The young man himself, in order to distract himself from all this fuss, read a book with a bright pink cover, and then his friend suddenly declared that it was quite funny to watch how he told everyone about his hatred of romance, but in fact secretly enjoyed reading such melodramas. This book, which recently became a real long-awaited hit among the most devoted readers, was called Confession of a Childhood Friend, and it was hotly discussed almost everywhere because it contained many sincere feelings and touching memories that could touch anyone. Suddenly, the man became sharply and irritably angry, slamming the book with its bright and flashy cover onto the table with such a loud bang that it startled his companion, who had not at all expected such a sudden and strong outburst of emotion, which seemed almost unbridled and stormy. He was terribly angry at the writer who had created this book and achieved great success and wide fame, but at the same time was forced to constantly answer countless calls from fans and annoying critics, which clearly irritated her and deeply exhausted her mentally. The city gradually plunged into deep night, and above its rooftops stretched an endless, sparkling, starry sky, flickering in the complete darkness with its bright lights, as if promising new hopes and hiding secrets that no one yet knew or could even guess about. The phone suddenly rang unexpectedly, but the voice that answered was cold and formal. The subscriber the phone was calling was not currently accepting calls because his line was temporarily unavailable, causing the caller a deep sense of anxiety and uncertainty. The director of a large company was overcome with intense and irresistible anger because he could not get through to the author of a book that had caused heated discussions and wide publicity, which only increased his irritation and feeling of helplessness in this situation. He took a step back, deciding that he would definitely come to her later to settle all the difficult issues and find out all the details in person, when suddenly his attention was drawn to something strange and unusual in the surrounding environment, which made him become wary and focus on the smallest details. The young man turned around sharply, hearing a strange, alarming, and unusual noise from behind. Tightly clutching the phone in one hand, tensely prepared for any surprises and changes that could happen at this very moment and completely change his entire future destiny and plans. Near the house, against the backdrop of the noisy city landscape, someone's voice sounded sad and distinct, as if reminding him of the past, when he first learned that his lady was already married, and this painful discovery forever changed the course of his feelings and hopes for the future. The guy was upset and complaining to the girl he was with that his relationships always ended so badly and painfully, leaving a heaviness, bitterness, and deep sadness in his soul, like a repeating painful story that he could not get rid of. Shinara stood silently, listening attentively to the boy's complaints, which seemed so meaningless and inappropriate to her that they weren't even suitable for her story. But she held back, trying not to show her irritation and to remain as polite and calm as possible in that situation. She waved her hand in farewell and was about to say goodbye and leave, gently telling him not to be upset and assuring him that everything would definitely work out for him, despite the broken heart and deep pain that he was now experiencing and could not fully understand. But suddenly the young man started talking about Shinara herself, remembering that he had recently unexpectedly thought about her and even asked a friend to invite her here to this cozy and quiet cafe to finally meet and talk, hoping for the understanding and support that he needed so much now. Pressing his hand to his chest, he admitted that back then at school he had not been truly interested in her, but then everything had changed. He remembered for a long time and painfully how she looked at him with her sincere, warm, and loving eyes, which did not leave his memory and touched his very heart. But apparently the young man back then in high school misunderstood everything and sincerely believed in his feelings, while his nerdy classmate was not looking at him at all, but with a gentle and loving smile turned to his friend, which he could not understand and accept for a long time. Shin-ara froze in confusion and slightly surprise, wrinkling her face, because it seemed to her that the guy simply misunderstood everything and mistook someone else's feelings for his own, which created a difficult, confusing, and emotionally difficult situation for everyone involved, touching on their past much deeper than one could expect. But then, compared to his blonde friend, the guy looked more like a cat who only accompanied the prince and was not at all the main object of attention or admiration, which added even more ambiguity and understatement to their school relationship and complicated past. Frowning and covering her face with her hand, Shin-ara quietly apologized and with slight hesitation asked what the name of the guy was, whose name she, to her shame, had forgotten, although it once seemed important and familiar to her, like a key to unraveling this whole complicated story and their difficult feelings. The man in the cap froze, feeling very embarrassed and deeply perplexed, because he thought that she still had sincere feelings for him, but it turned out that she did not even remember his name, which was an unexpected and painful blow to his heart. Surprised and very disappointed, he suddenly yelled at her, and Shin-ara felt very awkward, shyly threw her hand behind her head, and explained that she did not want to offend or hurt anyone. It was just different before, and she did not want to conflict with anyone or quarrel. This only made the man even more angry. He pressed his lips together in anger, his face turned purple, and his body began to tremble from internal anger and irritation, because the situation was not developing at all as he expected, and the feelings inside him were seething more and more with each passing minute. Suddenly, a grown and handsome man shouted at her, demanding that she not lie and admit that she was actually in love with him, but for some reason was now afraid to openly admit her feelings and admit her sincere love. Incredibly scared and embarrassed, Shin-ara timidly asked what the guy's name was, but he answered her by shouting that he didn't like her and he would never answer her such questions, trying to hide his true feelings and avoid further conversations. Suddenly, a clear and unexpected voice came from the phone, which said that a drunk guy nearby was trying to hit his girlfriend, and asked to immediately call the police, adding tension and causing everyone present to freeze in alarm and concern. It was the director of the company, who was closely watching a young couple who had recently had a quarrel and was clearly concerned about what was happening between them, assessing the situation with professional attention and caution so as not to miss something important and dangerous. After briefly ending the conversation and putting the phone aside, he noted that he felt as if he had witnessed physical violence from the guy, which caused him great anxiety and a desire to intervene in the situation to prevent further trouble and possible harm. This irritated and angered the man in the cap, who sharply ordered his companion in the suit not to meddle in other people's affairs and not to interfere, considering that it was not his concern and not his responsibility to sort out these relationships or conflicts. However, the man in the suit calmly replied that it was his beloved who deserved attention because she was clearly scared and needed support, expressing his concern and persistently defending her despite his companion's displeasure. In response to this, the young man put his hand on his interlocutor's suit and firmly stated that Shin-ara was not his girlfriend at all, which left everyone present slightly confused, making them think about the real relationship between these people and the hidden feelings that remained unsaid. The company boss abruptly and unceremoniously pushed the drunkard away with his hand, expressing obvious irritation and hostility because he was wearing an expensive suit and an expensive watch, and in front of him stood a guy in a dirty cap, looking extremely unkempt and completely undeserving of any respect. He winced with obvious disdain, sternly warning him not to come near him, emphasizing his superiority and cold attitude towards the stranger, whose appearance and behavior seemed to him offensive to his high status and social position. The guy in the cap stood awkwardly, raising his hand as if expecting a blow or another insult, because never before had he been so sharply pushed away and ignored, as if he did not exist at all and was completely invisible in this world. After this, the boy slowly recoiled, feeling the weight and coldness of the rich man's gaze, who looked down on him, as if evaluating and belittling him, not hiding his obvious contempt and complete lack of desire to have any conversation with him. Shin Ara watched with genuine interest and slight surprise as the same guy who had previously threatened her was now himself scared of the possibility of calling the police and getting serious punishment for his actions, which left her with mixed feelings. Suddenly, the man dropped them in fear, running away quickly, afraid of serious consequences and not wanting to face the law, which made Shin Ara feel relieved and at the same time slightly surprised by the abrupt change in his behavior. With a gentle blush on her cheeks, Shin Ara sincerely and wholeheartedly thanked her savior for helping her resolve an unpleasant and dangerous situation with a drunk who was pestering her, feeling gratitude and trust in the person who supported her in the most difficult moment. After that, filled with genuine joy and a desire to give back, she offered him a gift voucher with a warm smile as a symbol of gratitude for his kindness and timely help, which allowed her to avoid a serious conflict and unpleasant consequences. The man was deeply irritated and felt inner disappointment that she did not recognize him, although they had already met once, and this forgetfulness seemed to him a painful betrayal, which only strengthened his determination to find the author and find out the truth. Without hesitation, he turned away abruptly and walked away, but his thoughts were occupied with continuing the search for that very writer who had disappeared from his field of vision. His persistence knew no bounds, despite the fact that it seemed unnecessary for her to answer his calls and show any interest. An inner anger paralyzed his thoughts as he thought in despair about what that girl writer could be doing, who did not pick up the phone and seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth, which only fueled the flames of irritation in him and made him torment himself with doubts. Gritting his teeth in inner anger, he heard the girl sharply demand that he fall behind and stop pursuing her. However, despite her insistent words, she did not stop and continued to follow him, as if challenging his unyielding stubbornness and iron determination. At the most unexpected moment, as if showing amazing dexterity and determination, Shin Ara grabbed his hand, interrupting his movement, and a soft, barely noticeable smile froze on her lips, as if it contained hidden hope and a warm desire to soften the tense atmosphere between them. With a light, barely audible laugh, the girl said that she noticed a book with a delicate pink cover that he was carrying in his hands, and immediately recognized it, as if this book held special meaning for her and evoked warm memories from the past. Then, with a slight smile on her lips, she added that she could, as the author, gladly sign this book for him if he wished, and the guy, stunned by her words, froze in place, finally realizing that in front of him stood the very writer he had been looking for so long. Inside, the space was filled with the atmosphere of a strict but sophisticated business interior, where every detail reflected neatness and minimalism, which made the room both cozy and formal, emphasizing the tension of the moment. The young man in the cap stood irritated and dissatisfied. His face expressed anger and hidden annoyance, as if the whole world around him was becoming an enemy, and his internal tension was growing, creating a feeling of an incessant struggle with himself and the circumstances. He answered his friends with slight sadness and a hint of disappointment that Shin Ara had already left, and unfortunately he was never able to talk to her, although he really wanted to. But the moment for conversation was missed, and now there was only awkward silence and regret in his soul. Han Sunyi, sitting comfortably next to him, with a slight smile and warm interest, asked his interlocutor why he had invited the girl to talk outside at all, and what the real reason for such an unexpected invitation was, showing sincere curiosity and slight mockery. The guy hesitated, took a deep breath, and not knowing how to answer this question honestly and openly, he felt ashamed to admit that Shin Ara had simply brushed him off, pointing out that she didn't even remember his name, which caused him a mixture of embarrassment and deep inner disappointment. His friends were expecting a more confident and clear answer, but silence only filled the space around them, while Han Sunyi continued to sit with a slight smile, and the girl sadly looked away, not understanding what exactly the guys were talking about, and feeling as if she was on the sidelines of this difficult conversation. The young man in the cap briefly replied that he and the lady had indeed met, but they had not managed to have a normal conversation, as if the words were lost in the air, and their conversation remained unfinished, filled with understatement and slight sadness. Hearing that the girl had been taken by some businessman, Han Sunyi said with obvious surprise and bewilderment that this seemed strange and illogical to him, because in his mind such a girl simply could not have a boyfriend, which caused an internal conflict in him. At this time, the cafe worker concentrated and carefully, slowly laid out the food on the shelves, creating an atmosphere of comfort and order around himself, where every item was in its place, filling the room with warmth and tranquility, which contrasted with the noise and bustle of the street outside the windows. Shin-ara sat down with her head down, thoughtfully trying to collect her thoughts, because she just wanted to thank her reader for his support and sign his book, but it turned out that this person was her own boss from the company's editorial office, which caused her to have mixed feelings. A copy of her book lay quietly on the table, like a symbol of a completed journey and the anticipation of new achievements, attracting the eye with its content and promising to conceal within itself many told stories and cherished secrets, ready to be revealed to the attentive reader. The man, who looked so flawless and confident that his smile seemed like a ray of light on a cloudy day, introduced himself as Ju Wan-cha, the director of the publishing house's editorial office, who had been looking for her for a long time to personally talk about something important and discuss the prospects of working together. With her head down in a show of embarrassment and slight guilt, Shin-ara sincerely apologized for lying about her hospitalization earlier, to which the interviewee admitted with a hint of sadness in his voice that his heart literally sank into his boots when he learned that her new novel might not see the light of day. Shin-ara, still in shock and bewilderment, looked at Ju Wan-cha attentively, listening to his words about how they had met before, although the girl herself could not clearly remember his face or name, which only added to the ambiguity and confusion in her soul. Meanwhile, the other guy in the cap, who had been shouting and expressing irritation earlier, also found out that she had forgotten his name, which only increased her inner turmoil and awkwardness, further confusing her emotions and thoughts, as if in a whirlpool of complicated relationships. Shin-ara blinked, lost in her thoughts and memories, when Ju Wan-cha, interrupting her thoughts with a businesslike smile and slight insistence, reminded her that it was time to move on to the main topic of their conversation, discussing future projects and new manuscripts. With a forced smile that did not hide his slight interest and curiosity, he asked when he could expect the next manuscript from the talented writer, as if trying to inspire her to new creative achievements and continue her successful work. But after hearing Shin-ara say that she couldn't write a new book yet, Ju Wan-cha suddenly raised his voice, accusing her of deliberately mocking him and the entire editorial staff by playing with their expectations and hopes. With a frown and a hint of incomprehension in his voice, he asked how much longer it would take her to complete the novel, expressing his concern and desire to see the results of her creative work as soon as possible, which seemed long awaited and important to him. Raising her index finger, Shin-ara calmly explained with a slight smile that her producer had previously said that, if needed, she could take a break at any time to rest and gain strength to continue working on the book, which was an important condition for her. Closing his eyes and taking a deep breath, Ju Wan-cha answered seriously that leave could only be taken for truly serious reasons, either due to one's own illness or the death of a loved one, emphasizing the rigidity and strictness of the publishing rules he represented. Sitting at a table in a quiet cafe, they discussed in detail the girl's new novel, which she could not bring to completion, delaying the process and causing Ju Wan-cha great concern and a desire to understand what her difficulties were and the reasons for such long delays. Deciding to answer honestly and openly, Shin-ara admitted that she would need about 2 more months to calmly and qualitatively complete the novel, because she wanted to do everything at a high level and not make mistakes in such an important and long-awaited work for her. The man's answer clearly irritated him. Folding his arms across his chest and frowning, he said in a sharp tone that the girl was clearly not quite right in the head, expressing doubts about her professional adequacy and emotional stability at the moment. Tilting his head slightly to the side, Ju Wan-cha said with a heavy expression that he was very sorry to hear such words from her, because he expected a completely different attitude to work and responsibility, and such revelations disappointed him as a leader and a person who was trusted. The man waved his hand in irritation and said that the producer had clearly provided false information to the company, and now, in connection with this event, it would be necessary to apply disciplinary action to her in order to show the seriousness of the situation and maintain order in the team. Frightened by such a prospect, the young girl asked with horror what would happen to her producer, who, in her opinion, could also suffer from misunderstandings because this was her close person and colleague with whom they worked together. Clenching his fist in obvious anger and slightly breaking the stick in his hands, the man calmly but firmly stated that he would personally punish his subordinate for failing to perform her duties, demonstrating a strict approach to discipline and responsibility in his company. Listening to the boss about to take the girl away, Shin-ara suddenly screamed, demanding that he stop immediately and not rush into decisions because she felt very uneasy and understood that the situation could get out of control at any moment. She felt so awkward and uncomfortable at the thought of someone wanting to punish another person without understanding the reasons that she firmly stated that it was she who had the problem with writing the main character, which is why the novel never moved forward, explaining the delay sincerely and honestly. Suddenly, putting her hands in front of her as if defending herself, Shin-ara shouted loudly and with despair in her voice that it was he, as the CEO of the company, who was to blame for all the difficulties and delays that had arisen, blaming him for excessive pressure and wrong decisions. Leaning forward with an expression of obvious bewilderment and a little rudely, Ju Wan-cha asked again what exactly the girl meant, trying to understand as clearly as possible her words, which seemed unexpected and completely incomprehensible to him in the context of their previous conversation and general understanding of the situation. Shin-ara calmly but firmly reminded him that it was he himself who had previously insistently told her to quit writing, which became an unpleasant but very important reminder for her, greatly influencing her future decisions and attitude towards her own work. The guy thought deeply, trying to remember all the details of their first conversation, when she insisted that he become the prototype of the main character of her novel, which then seemed like a simple condition, but now acquired much more meaning and weight in their relationship. With a slight wrinkle on his forehead and an expression of noticeable confusion, he realized with shock and great surprise that his refusal to participate and help was taken by Shin-ara as a direct signal that she had stopped writing entirely, which, in essence, sounded almost like an admission of defeat. After thinking for a few moments, Ju Wan-cha looked closely at his companion and asked her to explain one important detail, trying to understand the deep motives behind her work and creative process in order to better appreciate her capabilities and potential. Tapping his fingers on the cover of her book with a slightly thoughtful expression, he asked if she already had a prototype of the main character. Would she be able to significantly speed up the process of finishing the novel and bring it to its logical conclusion without further delays? Thoughtfully stirring the drink in her hands, Shin-ara confidently replied that if she was given at least a month or two of extra time, she would be able to deal with the image of the bad guys and carefully think through the character of the main character in order to finish the book on a high level. Suddenly, Ju Wan-cha stood up from his seat with determination, emphatically declaring that she would not need a whole month or two to thoroughly study all these books, because there was a much more efficient and faster way to create the image of the main character, which would save a lot of time. Carefully adjusting his tie with a slight smile, he confidently said that he was ready to help her personally, becoming a real living person and a living inspiration for writing the character, because such an approach would bring much more benefit and make the hero more alive, realistic, and deep. Then, leaning towards Shinara, he gently kissed her on the cheek and said with a slight smile and kind intonation that he would gladly agree to become a real prototype of the main character for her, giving her novel that spark and energy that is so necessary for the successful completion of the work. Shinara froze in place with surprise, slight excitement and confusion, realizing that it was this guy who was offering himself to her as a living model for creating her main character, and this unexpected thought made her heart beat faster, awakening new feelings in her. After she took a sip of the cold drink, she suddenly and completely unexpectedly spat it out of her mouth, recoiling in shock and complete bewilderment. It all happened so abruptly and unusually that it seemed as if time had stopped for a moment. Ju Wancha sat with a clear expression of anger and irritation on his face, because all this drink suddenly ended up splashed on his clothes and face, causing him a storm of indignation and unpleasant emotions, which he could not get rid of so easily. Suddenly, rising from his seat, he with some persistence and concern offered to give her a ride home, to which she politely but decisively replied that this was not at all necessary, since she herself was quite capable of walking to the right place without outside help. However, Ju Wancha, showing persistence, a desire to help and a little care, said that it was better to get home faster, and asked Shinara not to resist, after which she, without objection, silently followed him, accepting his offer without further ado. To her answer that it was okay, she was a little scared, and at the same time she was sincerely grateful to him for the care and attention he had shown. He only smiled, feeling the softness and trust in her words, which she, despite her fear, was ready to give him unconditionally and sincerely. Thus, she quickly found herself in the guy's car, who, without wasting a second and showing confidence in every movement, sat behind the wheel, confidently starting the car, as if every gesture of his was filled with determination and the desire to get her to a safe place as soon as possible. With his hands on the steering wheel, Ju Wancha looked at her attentively and a little nervously, as if trying to read the emotions in her eyes and understand how calm and confident she felt at this very important moment when they were together in a confined space. Suddenly, he quietly said that it was worth waiting a little, and slowly but very carefully raised his hand to her hair, as if he wanted to gently remove the strand of hair that had fallen on her face, showing the care and tenderness that he carefully hid under a mask of calm and imperturbability. Slowly and almost silently, he began to carefully approach her face with cold indifference in his eyes, and she, unexpectedly for herself, became very embarrassed by such a sudden and unexpected closeness, as if her heart began to beat faster from excitement and slight fear. And when he suddenly grabbed the seatbelt, Shinara pushed him away in fear, afraid that he would suddenly try to kiss her without her full consent, panicking and anxiously protecting her personal space and those boundaries that seemed inviolable to her. Covering herself with her hands in fear, the girl screamed that there was no need to go so far for the sake of some book, and even more so to turn him into a lover, creating an illusion between them and playing with feelings that she did not actually experience and did not want to experience now. Covering his face with his hand, the boy quietly muttered that he simply reached for the seatbelt to carefully fasten it, keeping her safe during the ride, showing both deep concern, sincere attention, and a desire to protect her from any possible danger on the road. Turning away awkwardly, Shinara suddenly realized clearly that she was wrong, and turned away to the window in embarrassment, sad and thoughtful, deeply immersed in her thoughts and experiences, while the guy confidently and calmly drove the car, slowly, focused, and attentively watching the road. Tearing his gaze away, the guy suddenly asked her with a slight smile and genuine interest how she managed to write her first book, whether she ever had a real prototype that inspired her to create the main character or the entire story. Not wanting to answer truthfully and reveal all the personal and intimate details, Shinara answered briefly and with a slight smile that she simply went and wrote without going into details, leaving the mystery of her inspiration for further reflection and discussion with him. The girl suddenly flinched and turned pale when Ju Wancha suggested that the prototype of the former hero of her book could be her own boyfriend, whom she had mentioned earlier, and this unexpected guess took her by surprise, causing a storm of emotions and confusion in her soul. Grabbing his elbow tightly from the dining table, she screamed loudly that he understood everything and revealed her secret, causing the man to swerve the steering wheel to the side, lose control, and almost get into a serious accident, which instantly made her heart beat faster with fear. His car began not just to drive along the road, but to weave strangely and crookedly between the lanes, as if reflecting the internal tension and irritation of the driver, who could not contain his anger and emotions caused by the unexpected conversation and her reaction. Her attitude and harsh words made the man even more angry, and he gripped the steering wheel tightly in his hands. His voice became harsh and angry. He began to shout that he was infuriated and irritated by the way she constantly apologized, as if she did not trust his feelings and words at all. Confused and a little embarrassed, Shinara finally admitted that she had indeed been in love with her former classmate before, and that was why she had chosen him as her prototype for the main character of her book, trying to express her true feelings and experiences through her art. Curious and a little surprised, young Ju Won-cha asked how the woman's romance was connected to confessing her love to another person, trying to understand the depth of her emotions and the motives that inspired her to create such a sincere and personal work. Closing her eyes and gathering her thoughts a little, Shin-ara explained to him that in this way, by writing the book, she was sort of confessing her love to her classmate, but now she absolutely does not want him to ever read her work because she is afraid of the consequences and reactions. At another traffic light, the light was bright red, insistently forbidding them to move further, forcing their car to stop and giving them time to immerse themselves in the thoughts that hovered between them, like unspoken words and feelings that required understanding and patience. Sitting in the car next to the man, Shin-ara suddenly burst into tears, openly and sincerely admitting that, in any case, everything she did before was not at all intentional and was definitely not aimed at hurting anyone or harming any of the people close to her. Suddenly, Ju Won-cha said with a gentle smile that he really liked her novel, the romance genre, wanting to cheer her up and sincerely support her in this difficult emotional moment, showing that he appreciated her work and believed in her talent, despite all her doubts and fears. The girl screamed in response that he was saying this because it was his job to support and praise, but the man calmly and confidently replied that this was not so, because he had read her book before their first meeting and admitted that the work was indeed good and touching. His hand suddenly, gently but firmly squeezed her palm and carefully fastened the seatbelt, securely and confidently securing it in place, as if wanting not only to protect her, but also to show care and sincere support at this difficult moment in her life. And then, getting a little closer, Ju Won-cha softly and sincerely said that he really liked her book, and that he was deeply touched by her sincere creativity, which gave her confidence and made her feel truly understood and appreciated. Finally, they calmly drove up to the house. The car smoothly stopped at a cozy and familiar residential building, where the girl felt relief and complete safety, knowing that she was about to find herself in the familiar and warm environment of her personal and native space. Upon arrival, the lady admitted with a small smile that she had changed her mind about the main character of her book, because now her thoughts had changed significantly, although Ju Won-cha remembered the guy with whom Shin-ara had previously been sincerely in love and who, perhaps, would forever remain in her heart. Thoughtfully placing his hand to his chin, he quietly and with a slight smile said that perhaps the guy she was secretly in love with would become even more interested in her if her books became popular and brought her well-deserved success, recognition, and wide respect among readers. The man insistently and confidently stated that if she really wanted her dream to come true, then she should seriously try on her next book, put all her soul and talent into it in order to achieve the desired success and recognition. Shin-ara, slightly blushing, approached the man and was clearly not prepared for his words, but his offer was tempting and unexpectedly touched her heart, making her think that she could achieve much more than she ever thought. Soon she was carefully dropped off near her own home, and she sincerely thanked the director of the company for giving her a lift, showing care and attention that seemed so important and pleasant on this difficult day for her. He, with a forced smile and a slight playfulness in his voice, said that if she ignored his calls again, he might come to her house wildly insistently to make sure that she was okay and hadn't forgotten her promises. These suddenly thrown words noticeably confused the young, vulnerable girl because an anxious premonition arose in her heart, and she suddenly realized that the young man who offered her a ride could have insidious, dishonest, and dangerous intentions. For example, to find out her address. Their tense, suddenly interrupted conversation immediately attracted the attention of the wary Han Sunyi, who was standing nearby, and without thinking twice, he stepped forward, looking at them carefully, asking with slight anxiety what exactly the girl named Shin-ara was doing here. The director of the educational institution, together with the instructor, accidentally overheard this lively, strange conversation, and exchanging glances in silent surprise, soon realized that these two were neighbors living in the same area, but for some reason carefully hiding this fact. From the girl's looks, awkward gestures, and uncertain movements, it was immediately obvious that she had long been madly in love with the young man opposite her. She would blush deeply, hide her eyes, or tug at the edge of her sleeve, as if unable to cope with strong and sincere feelings. He realized quite quickly and clearly that in the eyes of the young dreamy girl, Han Sunyi occupied a special, almost mythical place in her heart, because it was he who became the main character for her and inspired the image of the mysterious, noble protagonist in the previous romance book. After thinking for a moment, slightly squinting his eyes and pretending to hesitate, he suddenly asked the writer to lean slightly closer to him, as he supposedly wanted to confide something important, something intimate, something that could only be said in a quiet whisper in her ear. Almost inaudibly, smiling slightly, he said with deliberate indifference that the blonde man she had come with was absolutely nothing like the ideal prince she had described earlier, and with these words he deeply offended the author, causing her to scream and recoil. Himself felt genuine surprise and slight confusion when he suddenly realized that his ex-girlfriend, with whom he had once had warm feelings, had apparently already found herself a new boyfriend a long time ago and now was absolutely not hiding it from those around her. The man behind the wheel gripped the steering wheel tightly with both hands, as if clinging to reality, and with a tense, concentrated expression on his face, he drove the car along a road full of turns, risks, and surprises, not allowing himself to be distracted from the path for a moment. Ju Wancha drove home slowly along a deserted road, and in his thoughts, images from a book he had recently read did not subside. In it, Shin-ara tenderly and sincerely described her deep, almost forgotten youthful love for a former classmate, awakening memories. The city spread out before him in the silence of the night. The streets seemed lifeless and empty. The houses stood as if watching him from the darkness. The trees barely rustled in the wind, and the lanterns cast a yellow light, as if illuminating the past and scattering memories around. Meanwhile, a truly important and painful conversation took place between Han Sunyi and Shin-ara. He sadly and confusedly admitted that he rushed after her after learning about her leaving their meeting, and now he was pained to see her next to another man. The blonde suddenly spoke confidently, expressing aloud his long-standing and painful thought. Did he understand everything correctly before, and does this girl, so quiet and mysterious, have someone whom she truly loves sincerely, without pretending or hiding her feelings? And then, frowning, he pressed his lips together and, with an almost muffled irritation in his voice, sharply told her that under no circumstances should she have been so naive, stupid, and open in meeting with strangers from dubious speed dating and entertainment apps. She stared straight into her interlocutor's face, puzzled and even slightly frightened, not immediately understanding why his voice sounded so cold, while he, with great pain in his voice, spoke about how much he was disappointed by her actions and gullibility. Meanwhile, still holding the steering wheel tightly with both hands and keeping his eyes on the road, Ju Wancha thought with a heavy sigh that the lover of that very girl was not at all as she described him. Not sweet and not kind, but rather mean, cunning, and treacherous. In complete confusion, with a slight tremor in her voice, she quietly asked what applications exactly this young man was talking about, because she did not expect such a sharp reaction and did not understand what exactly could seem offensive, strange, or suspicious to him. Putting his hand heavily behind his head and sighing deeply, the man admitted with obvious sadness and slight regret that he had never met people who actually used such dubious applications. But, unfortunately, they still exist and are widespread. He suddenly remembered a disturbing incident from his childhood when he had arrogantly and mockingly tried to tease a girl by telling her to abruptly break with something, and, to his surprise, he saw how she had actually gotten scared and jumped from a height without hesitation. Covering his face with his hands and trying to hide his confusion, he began to explain that such applications are usually used by strange and suspicious eccentrics who skillfully pretend to be normal people in order to easily deceive gullible and naive users. Young Shin Ara listened to the guy's confused and incoherent speech with obvious bewilderment and irritation, completely not understanding what kind of ridiculous nonsense he was talking about and why he suddenly decided to accuse her of something that she had never done and had no intention of doing. Therefore, having collected her thoughts and finally decided to stop all omissions and doubts, she decisively and directly asked her companion what exactly things and applications he was talking about, hoping to receive from him an honest, clear, and frank answer without any misunderstandings. After thinking deeply about his words regarding strange and suspicious dating sites, she calmly, but with a slight hint of irritation and reproach, replied that it was none of his business whether she used these applications or not, because her personal life was not subject to discussion by anyone. The guy was clearly very surprised by her sharp, bold, and uncompromising answer, thought for a moment and froze, and then admitted honestly that he had no idea that she could have such strange interests, and that she was not at all interested in such things, which was a complete surprise for him. After that, he suddenly grabbed her hand quite tightly, not letting her leave and interrupting the conversation. With a serious and slightly anxious expression on his face, he said something important, that it was absolutely impossible to do this, especially when it came to trust and personal boundaries in any human relationship. A little later, he added, embarrassed and uncertain, that even the very strange and sometimes unpredictable people he had encountered sometimes used such applications, but for her this was completely unacceptable, and she could not allow herself to make such mistakes. Then, with obvious awkwardness and some shyness, he began to explain the reasons for his wariness and sincere concern, trying to convey that his concern came from the depths of his soul and sincere feeling, and not from a desire to control her or limit the freedom of her personal choice. It reminded her of that touching and very vivid scene from the book, in which the main character frankly and with great emotion confessed his most secret feelings and weaknesses to his beloved, showing his vulnerability and sincerity, which seemed incredibly deep and real to her. There, the blonde man, with gentle sadness and sincere tenderness, confessed to the lady with soft pink hair that he had long been hopelessly in love with her, and decided to open his heart, seeing that she was with another person, experiencing both pain and a weak hope for reciprocal feelings. Shin Ara held her breath, listening intently to every word the guy said, hoping that she was about to hear a declaration of love, but her heart was pounding with mixed feelings, because she had been waiting for this moment so much, as if the whole world had frozen in anticipation of a magical miracle. However, he said something completely different, that he did not want to be the only person who walked alone, without a partner nearby, without someone who could become his support and consolation in this big, lonely world, which caused a slight bitterness and doubt in her. Hansunyi began to complain sadly about why everyone around him was so desperately looking for their soulmate, that special person who would fill the void, but he didn't want to be alone without a girl, without warmth and support, which caused a strange and disturbing feeling in Shin Ara's soul. Then he waved his hands in mild annoyance and insisted that it was because of her that he began to feel deeply deprived, abandoned and forgotten in this vast world, as if his bright, once light-filled world had suddenly plunged into the dark, cold shadows of disappointment and melancholy. This greatly disappointed the girl. Her face instantly faded, and a heavy shadow of sadness appeared in her eyes, as if a gloomy sky covered with thick clouds hung over her soul, and her heart was filled with a cold feeling of loneliness and uncertainty, which completely darkened her inner world. However, despite all her inner doubts and worries, she patiently and with a slight smile explained to the man that the guy was only her boss at work, her strict chief, and there was nothing more between them than a formal business relationship that did not go beyond the bounds of professional ethics. Relieved and a little relaxed, Han Sunyi took a deep breath, clapped one hand against the other with joyful relief, and said with a slight smile that now everything became logical and understandable because she really was a writer, and this explained many of his previous suspicions and worries, dispelling them completely. Realizing that she no longer wanted him to read her personal books and interfere in her life, the girl decisively turned around and walked away, wanting to quickly go home, where no one would disturb her, where she could calmly be alone with herself and her thoughts. Confused and unable to understand the reason for her sudden departure, Han Sunyi shouted loudly after her, sincerely wondering why she had suddenly and abruptly started to leave him, as if something important between them had suddenly changed or disappeared without any warning. Grabbing her shoulders with a slight sense of anxiety and genuine excitement in his eyes, Han Sunyi carefully asked if she was really offended by such a seemingly insignificant little thing, trying to penetrate the depths of her feelings and understand the reasons for her sudden and unexpected upset. Slowly, with some uncertainty and inner hesitation, he began to speak, carefully choosing his words, but suddenly fell silent, as if doubting his thoughts and afraid of inadvertently causing her even more pain with his sincere but harsh statement. With a slight blush, slightly embarrassed and with interest, the young and beautiful Shin-ara asked what exactly he wanted to say, trying to grasp the meaning of his thoughtful silence and understand where this difficult and very frank conversation between them was leading. To which he, gathering his courage and showing rare sincerity, quietly and honestly replied that when she was angry, her face became ugly and gloomy, and this was precisely what upset him even more, because he saw something more in her and wanted her to always remain happy and beautiful in his eyes. Without allowing her to leave and escape from this tense and emotional place, Han Sunyi persistently asked and even ordered her to state the reason why she was so angry and ready to shut up, trying to get to her heart and understand her deep inner experiences and feelings. When she resolutely refused to answer his questions and remain open, he abruptly grabbed her phone and began quickly typing something on the screen, deciding to act in his own way to find out the whole truth and understand what was happening with maximum honesty and sincerity. Without thinking for long and experiencing inner confusion and doubts, he made a firm decision that it was worth reading her book because, in his opinion, it could help him better understand her feelings, thoughts, and the reasons for her strange behavior, as well as improve their communication and mutual understanding for the future. The lady, feeling threatened and not wanting him to interfere in her personal space and invade her personal secrets, tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he quickly raised the device higher and did not give it back, which caused a stormy and emotional quarrel between them, filled with reproaches and mutual accusations. Suddenly, Han Sunyi froze in surprise and slight amazement when he saw that all her books were sold out to the last copy, so popular and beloved was she among readers and fans of her outstanding talent and creativity. The handsome Han Sunyi himself was sincerely amazed and puzzled, because just a few minutes ago she herself insistently asked him to read her book, and now she suddenly changed her mind and refused, which caused him inner turmoil and confusion in his thoughts, giving him no peace. The girl sighed with relief and joy, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her soul, when suddenly the guy unexpectedly declared that in that case he himself would come to her house and read the original of her work, which caused a warm smile and slight excitement in her, filling her heart with warmth. The young man smiled back, animated and interested, with a slight hope and expectation that she would accept his proposal with consent, thereby opening up new opportunities for mutual understanding and sincere communication for both of them. With her hands clasped in front of her, Shin-ara thoughtfully thought that this could really be a great opportunity to invite her secret lover to her home, to finally reveal her feelings to him, and share the most secret thing she had kept in her heart for a long time. At school, Han Sunyi had many girls who were friends with him and showed obvious interest in him because he was popular and respected among his peers, but the girl remained in the shadows, hiding her true emotions and experiences. But Shin Ara herself was a rather unremarkable nerd girl, often wearing not very stylish and even bad clothes, was not distinguished by striking beauty, so she felt invisible and sometimes underestimated by others, which made her inner world even more closed and closed. Staring thoughtfully at her reflection in a large mirror, the beauty began to think deeply about how exactly she could change her image to look more attractive, confident, and radiant, worthy of the admiring glances of others and new impressions. In the cozy hairdressing salon around her, people sat in comfortable chairs, enjoying the process of transformation, and friendly and experienced staff masterfully brought beauty, creating a comfortable atmosphere in which each client could feel special and unique. Suddenly, the girl who was helping the girl change her hairstyle unexpectedly reported that someone had called her several times in a row and, a little surprised, gave her the phone so that she could deal with the persistent and possibly important calls that were causing slight irritation and anxiety. Shin Ara, still sitting in a comfortable chair, calmly and confidently replied that it was just a trifle, and with a slight smile advised her assistant to simply turn off the phone completely so that nothing and no one would distract her from the important process of internal and external transformation that she was striving for. The writer herself was fully prepared for radical changes in her appearance. Her head was covered with a cap, and a towel was carefully thrown around her shoulder to protect her clothes from accidental stains, giving her the appearance of a determined and change-oriented woman ready for any experiments. Outside the windows of the barbershop, the modern high-rise buildings of the big city towered, reflecting the dynamic and fast pace of life in which the aspirations, dreams, and daily concerns of many people immersed in their own world are intertwined. Ju Wan-cha, sitting in a comfortable chair and looking anxiously at the phone screen, felt growing irritation and anger due to the fact that no one answered his calls and his messages were ignored, as if there was silence and indifference all around, aggravating his inner anxiety and doubts. His attempts to reach out through text messages also went unanswered, which only increased the feeling of loneliness and misunderstanding, forcing him to think about the reasons for such behavior and what was happening between them at this difficult moment. The producer, carefully entering the office, paused for a moment, feeling a slight tension in the air, and tried not to aggravate the boss's upset with her unexpected appearance, afraid to disturb his deep concentration or cause unwanted emotions at this very difficult and tense moment. Despite this, she quickly gathered her strength and decisively said that she had brought him fresh reports and the results of the work done, after which the boss warmly and sincerely thanked her, highly appreciating her efforts and maintaining a warm atmosphere of mutual cooperation and respect in the team. Upon learning that their editorial team had already contacted a new writer, Ju Wan-cha strongly advised the producer not to mention the weekend, since, as she herself had previously said, the other writer was set to work on those days, which could create certain complications or misunderstandings. Suddenly, the lady noticed that her boss had suddenly stood up from his seat and, heading somewhere away, quickly left the room. Intrigued and a little alarmed, she hastened to ask him where he was heading and what had caused such a sharp change in his mood. Before leaving the office, he calmly turned around and replied that he was heading to an important meeting with a writer whose work he would personally supervise and support in the near future, putting his soul and experience into the development of her talent and projects. The city lived its usual and unhurried life. High-rise buildings stretched upward, numerous cars scurried along the streets, the roads were filled with bustle and noise, and people hurried about their business, creating a living picture of a large metropolis in constant motion. Having parked the car neatly near one of the residential buildings, the company director walked out into the street in an impeccably fitting suit. His confident and measured gait emphasized his business status, and his strict appearance commanded respect and inspired trust in those around him. Ju Wan-cha, staring at the bright screen of his phone, felt a quiet hope and barely suppressed excitement that he would not have to look for the writer himself because she was very important to him, but all his expectations were shattered by the deafening silence and lack of response from her. Once again, he dialed her number, took a deep breath with fatigue and slight anxiety that he could no longer hide, and, with almost no hope of hearing an answer, prepared to put the phone down, feeling how patience and strength were slowly leaving his tired and exhausted soul. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the ringing of a bell nearby, like a soft whisper of fate, which made his heart beat faster and made him look around in search of the source of this unexpected sound, full of mysterious hope. A girl in a cap walked slowly next to him, with a tired and thoughtful expression on her face, as if she was carrying on her shoulders the weight of her thoughts and experiences, which were unknown to her, but were still reflected in her every movement, filling the stage with a special atmosphere of elusive melancholy and reflection. She thoughtfully and a little confusedly wondered whether she should really answer the call, because it was unknown who could call or write to her, and her heart was filled with doubts and caution, as if every decision could open new doors into her complex and unpredictable world. After that, she froze for a moment in front of the man. With a slight shadow of fatigue in her eyes and a quiet sigh, she admitted that she had already called him 1,000 times, never tired of hoping for an answer, but he only remained silent and did not respond to her attempts. Without thinking twice, Shin-ara quickly took off running, overcome with fear of the possible wrath of her strict leader, who, without a second's hesitation, hurried to follow her, trying to catch up and keep her in conversation. Pressing her tightly against the cold wall, he asked her with a persistent and slightly alarmed voice why she tried to run away, and when she saw the deep anger and disappointment in his eyes because of her bad behavior, fear instantly took hold of her, leaving no choice for excuses. Taking her phone in his hands, he confidently and slightly reproachfully pointed to the screen where her number was lit up, the very one he had called repeatedly, trying to get through and get at least some kind of answer, which the girl so stubbornly and persistently avoided, as if she was afraid to hear the truth. After that, Ju Won-cha, with anxiety and tenderness, trying to understand the reasons for her silence, asked her why she did not answer his calls, but she lowered her eyes, unable to find words to explain her silence, and her gaze reflected the full depth of her inner turmoil and painful sense of guilt. Shin-ara continued to make elaborate excuses and tried to turn her gaze away from him, but Ju Won-cha instantly noticed her attempts to avoid eye contact and did not give her the opportunity to hide from his honest gaze that demanded truth and sincerity. Grabbing her chin firmly but without violence, he firmly ordered her not to look away and to boldly look straight into his eyes, forcing her to feel responsible for her actions and openness to him, as if wanting to awaken courage and determination in her. When the hat suddenly flew off Shin-ara's head, Ju Won-cha froze for a moment, overcome with surprise and admiration, because he saw before him a completely new image of a girl, which immediately attracted his attention with its freshness and unusualness. The beauty decided to radically change her style. She curled her hair, cut it, and updated her hairstyle to appear more confident and attractive, hoping that such a change would help her feel different and distract herself from worries and doubts. A few days before, the hairdresser gave the girl a completely new and unexpected hairstyle, which turned out to be completely different from what Shin-ara had dreamed of and expected, but the result surprised her very much and even upset her. When the hairdresser saw how rage and deep discontent clouded her client's eyes, she immediately became confused and, in order not to aggravate the tension in the air, hastily left the room, promising to politely book the lady for a new procedure at a time convenient for her. The cafe, decorated in soft and gentle blue tones, was filled with neat tables arranged with intelligence and care, which created an unusually warm, calm, and inviting atmosphere where you just want to go in, relax, and enjoy aromatic coffee in the company of pleasant interlocutors. Adjusting his tie with a confident expression, Ju Won-cha said that if Shin-ara really didn't want to show off her new hairstyle to anyone, she should have just answered the phone instead of avoiding contact and creating unnecessary tension. Putting her cap back on, Shin-ara timidly asked for forgiveness, afraid of the director's anger and stern gaze that seemed to burn her soul, but she understood that she had to admit her mistakes and fix the situation. The man, without wanting to, tried to hold back the laughter that was rising to his lips, but he did it so awkwardly and clumsily that the girl immediately noticed his mockery, instantly flared up with indignation, and almost lost her temper, becoming angrier and angrier. However, he suddenly raised his head and, looking her straight in the eyes with unexpected seriousness, said that he absolutely did not care whether she had a perm, a short haircut, or a completely bald head, because for him, it did not matter. The words he said with a stony face and without a shadow of a doubt were unexpectedly painful for her. They seemed to pierce her heart, and, unable to contain her inner response, she suddenly recoiled, as if defending herself from something alien and cruel. With her head down, looking deeply disappointed and hurt, the girl withdrew into herself, her face darkened, and at that moment, Ju Wan-cha began to realize that perhaps he had gone too far, and his harshness had sounded not like the truth, but like a threat. Trying to somehow soften the tense and awkward atmosphere, the guy with a slight smile on his face said that, of course, he was a little surprised by her new hairstyle, because it was completely different from before, but still looked stylish, fresh and unexpected in its own way. Shinara was slightly embarrassed and even blushed when she heard his words that, in his opinion, the hairstyle really suits her and looks quite good. Although unexpected, it emphasizes her features, character, and creates an interesting impression. However, as soon as Ju Wan-cha heard from her that she had decided to change her image, hairstyle, and style for the sake of some other guy, his face changed dramatically. Veins bulged on his temples, his jaw tensed, and he could hardly contain his jealousy, resentment, and anger. In a stern and cold voice, he made it clear that since she herself had allowed the delay and completely missed all the deadlines, she was now obliged to make up for lost time without delay and, with redoubled energy, without rest or complaints, finish everything as quickly and accurately as possible. He was a classic example of a bad boy, outwardly attractive, well-groomed, and even charming, with a charming smile and expressive eyes, but at the same time with a disgusting character, a sharp temper, and a complete lack of empathy, which made him truly dangerous. The writer clenched her fingers into a fist and swore to herself that she would no longer waste time in vain. She would gather all her inner strength, inspiration, determination, stubbornness, and will to direct them against this man, turning anger into creative energy. Staring at the dimly flickering screen of her ancient laptop, she dreamed of writing the entire novel in one sitting, overcome by sudden inspiration, anxiety, excitement, and determination. But instead she found herself frozen in confusion, unsure of which line, thought, or scene to begin with. When she finally finished her work, filled with mixed feelings of excitement and hope, she carefully handed the laptop to her boss, wanting him to look at her work carefully and appreciate every line of soul and effort that she had put into it. Ju Wan-cha, slowly putting on her glasses with a slight smile on her lips and a squint in her eyes, confidently stated that the choice of the prototype of the main character for her work turned out to be an unusually successful decision, capable of giving the plot a special depth and liveliness, reflecting real emotions and experiences. After these words, he suddenly smiled sweetly, as if for a moment forgetting about the strict tone and stern expression on his face, and with sincere admiration noted that the style of her writing pleasantly surprised him with its freshness, ease, and genuine sincerity, which caught his attention from the first lines. His warm and friendly smile made Shinara's cheeks turn bright red, her heart began to beat faster and stronger, and a gentle embarrassment spread inside her, which made her look down and try to hide this moment of sincere and touching vulnerability. At first he asked the lady warily and with a slight dose of doubt whether she really saw him as such a ruthless scoundrel, and, noticing her confusion and bewilderment, he began to listen attentively to her justifications and explanations, which she was looking for in order to somehow explain her contradictory feelings. Ju Wan-cha thoughtfully and with deep interest continued reading her novel on an old laptop, plunging deeper and deeper into her creative world, trying to understand what hidden thoughts, experiences, and emotions were hidden behind every word and every page of the text she wrote, in order to better understand her soul. The man himself watched with alarm, growing concern, and even horror as the writer began to behave strangely and unpredictably, which made him increasingly afraid of what might be going on in her head and what dark and incomprehensible secrets were kept deep in her consciousness. Taking off his glasses and carefully placing them on the table next to his laptop, he politely but firmly, and with a slight hint of fatigue, invited the girl to step aside, stating that they had already done everything necessary and it was time to move on, leaving these anxious and tense moments behind and starting a new chapter. Shin-ara, reluctantly agreeing, asked for just a few minutes to herself, took off her glasses and thoughtfully stared out the window, watching the slow flow of life on the street, where cozy cafes and picturesque shops with colorful signs flashed by. People walked slowly along the busy street, passing other cafes and small shops, creating a lively and atmospheric picture of city life, filled with the sounds of conversations, the smell of fresh coffee, and the light rustling of leaves that gently swayed in the wind. While the girls stood to the side, quietly and thoughtfully discussing something among themselves, the tall blonde man, as if detached from what was happening, calmly leaned against the wall of the building and looked attentively at the screen of his phone, immersing himself in his thoughts and leading himself into his own inner world. When his girlfriend asked him where exactly he was going that evening, the blonde man, without the slightest doubt or hesitation, answered that his path lay to an old acquaintance, whom he sincerely hoped to see hospitably and to receive with kindness and warmth in her heart. However, his friend was in no hurry to let him go so easily, and, showing character and persistence, insisted that he change from his usual and comfortable sweatshirt into more neat and decent clothes, corresponding to the significance of the upcoming meeting and respect for his friend herself. Now the man, dressed in a black shirt with his hair neatly combed back, looked elegant and attractive, as if his every gesture and movement reflected confidence and hidden strength that attracted the glances of those around him, leaving no one indifferent. Looking around carefully, he thought that before heading home, he should stop by a cozy cafe to escape from everyday worries for a moment, enjoy the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and immerse himself in an atmosphere of quiet, calm, and comfort. Suddenly, noticing a familiar face inside the cafe, the man immediately stopped, and she, taking off her glasses, looked at him intently through the transparent glass, as if trying to discern something more behind his calm appearance. Memories, feelings, and hidden thoughts that awakened deep emotions in her. They met each other's eyes, surprised and tense, she in a cap, with slight anxiety in her eyes, and he with cold determination in his gaze, as if time had frozen for a moment, filling the space around with mysterious tension and unspoken feelings. Noticing the sudden appearance of her secret lover, Shin-ara quickly turned away in fear, as if trying to hide her emotions, and lowered her head down, trying to hide from his intense gaze and from the thoughts that were beginning to fill her mind at this difficult moment. Her boss noticed that something was clearly wrong with the girl, and with concern in his voice, he asked what exactly was troubling the beauty, feeling that her internal state had changed dramatically and required attention and support at this difficult moment for her. Shin-ara quickly stood up from her seat, pointed her finger to the side, and, trying to hide her excitement, said that before leaving she needed to go to the toilet for a short while to put her thoughts in order and gather her strength for further action. She headed for the door, trying to leave as quickly as possible, when suddenly a familiar male voice was heard from behind, unexpectedly interrupting her attempts to leave unnoticed and causing a mixture of anxiety, surprise, and uncertainty in her, forcing her to stop and turn around. There were quiet footsteps on the floor, and a familiar voice sounded behind him, which said with a slight hint of surprise and regret that he would never have thought that Shin-ara could go on a date with someone else, because he always thought that she was just busy with important things and had no time for meetings. It was her old childhood friend who came up behind her, called out softly, and asked what she was doing in this cozy cafe, as if trying to understand why their paths had diverged and what had made her find herself here in such an unfamiliar environment, filled with strangers' gazes. The beauty froze in place, feeling internal awkwardness, lowering her eyes and clenching her fingers near her lips. Her body seemed to have forgotten how to move correctly, and her heart began to beat faster from the unexpected meeting and the feeling of confusion that engulfed her from head to toe. Changing her voice to a lower and calmer tone, she said that Han Sunyi must have been mistaken, hoping to hide his true face and hide behind this simple excuse, as if afraid that he might know her true thoughts and feelings at this moment. The guy, not suspecting any trick, easily succumbed to her clever and rather innocent trick and, embarrassedly scratching the back of his head, apologized with a guilty smile for his unexpected lateness, slightly bowing his head as a sign of respect and a desire to smooth things over. After some hesitation and internal struggle, Han Sunyi quickly and decisively walked towards her, asking her worriedly if she was okay, because from her dim gaze it was clear that something was definitely wrong and she was clearly not feeling her best. The room in the back of an old, half-abandoned shopping center seemed lifeless. Dim light barely illuminated the shabby walls, covered with old advertising slogans, faded stickers, and bright graffiti, remaining here like shadows of a past, serene time. When asked by her worried interlocutor if she was okay, Shinara nodded with a strained and uncertain smile and, trying not to betray her inner tension, assured him in a trembling voice that she was indeed okay, although there was a hint of anxious uncertainty in her voice. Han Sunyi, despite his inner turmoil, could not restrain himself, and with obvious anxiety in his voice, noted that literally 2 blocks away there was the nearest city hospital, where she could receive qualified assistance if her condition suddenly worsened. Suddenly, as if by magic, a familiar and warm voice, full of care, excitement, and hope, came from behind her, calling out the girl's name, adding that he had been looking for her everywhere for a long time, without losing faith and almost despairing of finding her in this crowded place. Suddenly, footsteps were heard. A light, clear echo from the sound of patent leather shoes, whose soles loudly knocked on the marble floor, reflected from the walls of the sales area and broke the fragile silence around, foreshadowing the approach of something important and fateful. The guy, hearing a sharp and unusual sound, feeling a sudden change in mood, turned towards the source of the noise with slight surprise and confusion, because his conversation with the girl was unexpectedly interrupted at the most inopportune and sensitive moment. It was Ju Wan-cha, a tall, silent, and reserved young man who stood completely motionless with a stony expression on his face, his cold, tenacious gaze fixed on the couple, as if there was a threat, reproach, and hidden inner rage reflected in his eyes. Without paying any attention to the blonde, the man confidently and decisively approached the girl and, in a serious, slightly insistent tone, asked why she had not answered his questions, trying to understand what was hidden behind her sudden silence and detachment. When he almost let it slip and almost revealed her true identity, Shinara abruptly stopped him with a look, quietly and carefully turned around, afraid that her close childhood friend might recognize her and reveal the long-awaited secret too early, putting everything at risk. Ju Wan-cha, noticing the sudden intervention, froze in surprise, as if he couldn't believe his eyes and ears that their conversation had been interrupted at the very moment when the situation seemed almost resolved, and the tension was reaching its limit, forcing everyone to fall silent. Moreover, he did not expect at all that the lovely Shinara would come towards him and suddenly hug him, pressing herself tightly to his chest, as if seeking protection and support in his strong and reliable arms in this anxious and vague emotion-filled moment. Han Sunyi, seeing such a sincere and touching interaction between the lovers, blushed brightly, not hiding his embarrassment, slight envy and surprise, as if for the first time realizing the full depth of their feelings and the significance of what was happening at this exciting moment. Ju Wan-cha couldn't understand why his subordinate from work hugged him so suddenly, pressing him with such force that a cold shock ran through his entire body, causing him to involuntarily tense up and freeze in confusion. He began to try to break free from her strong embrace and push her away, feeling the growing tension and bewilderment, but she, as if sensing his confusion, squeezed her hands even tighter, not giving him the slightest chance to free himself from the unexpected contact. Suddenly, Shinara spoke in a firm and decisive tone, explaining that there was no need to take her to the hospital at all, because she had a loyal boyfriend who could always help and take care of her much better than any ambulance in this huge city. The girl thought to herself that they should quickly run away and hide as far away as possible, so as not to reveal her deception and carefully hidden secret, which could turn into a real disaster, and she was ready to do anything at any cost, just to keep this secret completely safe and secret. Ju Wancha blushed sharply from such strange and unexpected words of his subordinate, internally surprised and trying to understand what kind of nonsense she was talking, carefully hiding her true feelings and the reasons for such strange and inexplicable behavior, which did not fit into his head at all. Shinara raised her head, slightly embarrassed and confused, and asked the guy to play along with her sincerely, so that her secret lover would not see her in such a vulnerable, unusual, and vulnerable state, fearing that the truth could suddenly come out and ruin everything between them forever. Ju Wancha tried to understand what exactly she was talking about, but his face showed an expression of complete confusion and deep misunderstanding, because her words seemed too confusing, strange, and did not correspond to the reality that he saw around him, in fact. Suddenly, the blond man standing to the side spoke loudly and unexpectedly admitted that he sincerely envied the guy across from him who had such a sweet, caring, and touching girlfriend, causing a slight smile and at the same time a feeling of slight envy in everyone present in the room. The lady, squeezing her boss's body with her hands, carefully noticed how a barely noticeable tremor suddenly passed through his body, like a cold wave foreshadowing a thunderstorm, and immediately understood that suppressed emotions and deep tension were raging inside him. Shinara quickly realized that her boss was clearly angry and was filled with a strong anger that emanated from him like a negative aura, a pressing and implacable feeling that was impossible to hide or ignore, especially in this tense moment between them. Her secret lover and hiding important secrets from her important boss turned out to be much stronger and more important than the good behavior and efforts she showed towards her boss, which only worsened the situation and intensified the internal conflict. The lady raised her head, surprised and wary, and immediately realized that it was Ju Wancha who had become strangely silent, as if immersed in deep thought, not uttering a single word, which only increased the tension and uncertainty in the air between them. Suddenly, the guy smiled tensely at her, and with a barely audible hint of light irony said that after he finally settled accounts with her, she would definitely owe him for playing along in this difficult and very delicate situation, which was difficult to ignore. Shinara froze in surprise, feeling a mixture of relief and slight awkwardness when her boss unexpectedly helped her and did not refuse support at all, which became an important sign of trust for her, which she did not immediately believe in, but deeply appreciated. After this, the man firmly and clearly confirmed out loud that he and the girl were indeed a couple in love, whose feelings were sincere and mutual, despite all the difficulties and secrets, which made their relationship even more significant and strong for both. With his strong and reliable hand, he gently but firmly wrapped his arm around her thin wrist and pulled her sharply along with him, not giving her the opportunity to refuse or resist, as if he wanted to protect her at any cost and show that he was ready to take full responsibility. After that, with a light and warm smile on his lips, he invited her to go with him to the hospital if she suddenly got worse or unexpected symptoms appeared, because sincere care and support always came first in his life. Ju Wancha became wary and immediately tensed up, noticing that his companion had a strange, anxious, and slightly frightened expression on her face, which betrayed hidden pain and deep inner anxiety, which could not help but arouse his strong suspicions. Young Shin-ara shook her head sharply in a negative gesture, firmly and decisively declaring that she was quite capable of going and handling the situation herself, assuring that everything was in perfect order and there was no need to worry too much or interfere unnecessarily. And after that, Ju Wancha slowly turned towards the blonde and remembered his existence, noticing that he was standing to the side, blushing and clearly embarrassed, as if watching what was happening with some hidden envy, quiet jealousy, or quiet indignation. Ju Wancha sternly and briefly told the guy not to pester or bother his girlfriend anymore because he was her real boyfriend, and no one else was allowed such liberties in their relationship, which was absolutely clear and not discussed. The man and his partner walked out of the cafe calmly and confidently, without turning around, continuing their way forward, as if trying to forget this whole unpleasant situation and concentrate only on their plans and concerns, which was most important to them at that moment. The handsome blonde remained standing motionless, his hands at his sides, clearly confused and thoughtful, as if he didn't know what to do or what to say after what he had heard. His face expressed a mixture of surprise and slight irritation at what was happening. The young man, covering his face with his hand in obvious surprise and embarrassment, realized that he had again gone too far with his persistence and had to some extent shown excessive intrusiveness, which is why he now felt awkward and would like to leave this awkward situation as soon as possible. But then Han Sunyi froze in surprise when he realized that the man somehow knew that he didn't have a girlfriend, although he had never told anyone about it, and the question of where he could have gotten such information remained a mystery to him, causing confusion and suspicion. The city around was filled with ancient trees and cozy houses that created an atmosphere of vibrant and bustling life, where every corner kept its own stories and secrets, and the noise of everyday life and human conversations filled the streets with warmth and different energy. Ju Wancha walked out in a state of anger and irritation, his brows furrowed and his arms crossed in front of him, radiating barely contained anger that seemed to hang in the air around him, alerting everyone to his bad mood and inner turmoil. The two of them were sitting at a small table in a cafe, and the boss stubbornly and sternly asked his subordinate not to involve him in her personal affairs anymore, especially those related to love affairs, demanding that she keep her distance and not create unnecessary problems in the workplace. Shinara sheepishly and timidly apologized to him, quietly and sincerely saying that she had not meant to cause him any inconvenience or trouble and was truly grateful for his support, patience, and help in this difficult situation that meant a lot to her. Ju Wancha, sitting in all seriousness and with a slight smile on his face, calmly and confidently stated that now the writer was in his debt and would be obliged to somehow repay for the service rendered, implying that this was not the end of their communication and mutual obligations. At this point, their conversation officially ended, and it was time for the girl to leave, while the boss, without looking up from the screen, began to look again at his to-do list, open on the phone screen, trying to concentrate on work, despite what was happening around him and the noise. At that moment, his mother called him again unexpectedly, which caused him obvious irritation and discontent, because he knew that now she would again begin to insistently insist on marriage, which was a constant source of stress and tension in his relationships with his family and loved ones. Shinara suddenly stopped abruptly when the boss sternly and confidently called her and insistently asked her to wait, which caused her deep surprise and slight excitement, because she did not expect at all that she would be asked to stay late right now at the most inopportune moment. She was genuinely and a little confusedly surprised when Ju Wancha insisted that right now she had to stay and help him sort out one important and rather complicated matter related to his personal concerns, and that it would be her immediate responsibility, requiring her full dedication and maximum attention. Ju Wancha had already stood up, confidently stood in front of her and calmly, firmly said that fixing and helping him was precisely her job and personal responsibility, from which he categorically did not intend to retreat, thereby emphasizing the seriousness of the situation and the high level of trust in her abilities. After these words, they went together to a cozy and modern atmospheric place, a beauty salon, where a relaxing atmosphere of coziness and harmony reigned, and where Shin-Ara was able to see a variety of cosmetic products designed for thorough care and the creation of real beauty. On the neatly set table stood bright and sophisticated cosmetics, lipsticks of different shades, a large round mirror, professional brushes, and other important accessories that created the impression of a real oasis of beauty and style, where you wanted to completely immerse yourself and forget about everything. A sweet girl with delicate pink hair had just finished carefully tidying up a client's appearance, and young Ju Wancha, watching, was genuinely shocked. She looked stunningly beautiful and flawless like a real star. The beautiful Shin Ara herself looked incredibly attractive. Her luxurious curls softly framed her face, neat makeup emphasized her expressive features, and an elegant black dress added chic and sophisticated charm to the image, creating the impression of a true lady. The woman, confidently pointing her hand at the client, smiled warmly, and with a little playfulness told the guy that he was incredibly lucky to have such a wonderful partner, because she really looked simply magnificent, causing sincere admiration in everyone around her with her bright charm and sophisticated style. Shinara herself was a little surprised and confused because it was her first time without glasses, when she was able to take a close look at herself in the mirror and see how much she had changed in appearance and how good and confident she could look, despite all her natural modesty and shyness. As the young couple was heading towards the exit of the salon, the girl with pink hair smiled warmly and sincerely at them, wishing them a great and unforgettable date, adding a light touch of kindness, care, and sincere support to their evening, which was just beginning, promising many pleasant moments ahead. Suddenly, Shin Ara, feeling a growing sense of uneasiness, protested and persistently asked the chief where exactly they were heading, because it was extremely important for her to understand where this unexpected and mysterious path was leading, since uncertainty always aroused a slight excitement in her. The young man answered her briefly and a little mysteriously that they were heading to a special place, without specifying where exactly, and this did not quite suit the girl, since she preferred clarity and understanding of what was happening, especially when it came to her safety and comfort. Gently and with a slight smile, Ju Wancha ran his hand through a strand of her hair as if to soothe and show his concern, and quietly said that it would be a pity to go home right after they had together made her such a wonderful and attractive beauty that she could be proud of. Looking straight into her eyes with genuine attention and tenderness, he gave her a sincere compliment that made Shinara blush slightly, feeling the closeness and warmth of their mutual presence, because at that moment they were next to each other, as if time slowed down for the two of them. It was a cozy and stylish restaurant with subdued, soft lighting, where behind the bar counter, an experienced bartender with a friendly smile served exquisite wine and leisurely chatted with customers, creating an atmosphere of warm, relaxed evening comfort and pleasant rest for all guests. At the large table there were neatly arranged plates and glasses filled with exquisite dishes and expensive wine, which emphasized the high status of the establishment and the special significance of this evening for the friends and acquaintances present at the table. The man, slightly adjusting his elegant jacket, listened attentively to his interlocutor when he suddenly heard him, with slight envy and sincere admiration, admit that he was indeed very lucky to have such a charming companion by his side. His good friend, who was sitting opposite him, sighed sadly and began to complain that he didn't have a girlfriend, and he had absolutely no idea who to invite on a date in the near future, causing sincere sympathy and understanding among the listeners. After these words, the man raised his head and said with a slight grin that if something does not suit the man, then he should better tell his mother about it, who constantly interferes in his affairs, controls his every step, and tries to control his entire life without exception. With his head down sadly, the man replied that he definitely wouldn't be sitting here if everything was as simple and easy as it seemed at first glance, because the problems are much deeper, more complex and confusing than one could imagine in everyday life. Despite all these difficulties, his friend persistently advised Ju Wancha to start dating someone to distract himself from his constant problems, to get new emotions and feelings, because real relationships can become a reliable support and a source of joy in the most difficult times of life. The guy, pointing his finger widely at the tall, handsome man with a slight irony in his voice, said that it would really be useful if he at least once looked closely at his reflection in the mirror and finally realized what a difficult state his exhausted body and exhausted spirit were in. Ju Wancha looked extremely exhausted, like a man who had spent countless hours immersed in non-stop work. The dark shadows under his eyes seemed like deep pools of fatigue, and the tie hanging askew seemed to emphasize the full weight of his inner tension. His friend, watching him with understanding and slight sadness, added that he perfectly understood the anxiety of his friend's mother because it was high time for him to stop hiding in business and find that other half who could give him warmth and happiness in life. Moreover, he noticed with obvious concern that Ju Wan-cha showed absolutely no interest in the idea of marriage and family life, which worsened the situation, causing everyone close to him to worry about his emotional state and future well-being. A man's mother will find peace of mind and inner confidence when her son finally brings home a girl, because then a sincere hope will awaken in her heart for the appearance of long-awaited grandchildren who will fill the house with joy, meaning, and great warmth. However, deep down in her soul, she continues to live with an anxious and growing fear that her son may one day find himself under the yoke of a cunning and treacherous lady who will use him for her own benefit and only wait for the right moment to take possession of his property. Such an unexpected and even frightening turn of events can seriously worry and frighten the man's mother, forcing her to reconsider her reproaches to her son about the lack of marriage because his safety and well-being become a priority for her. Finding herself in a hospital ward under a drip and thinking it all over in silence, a woman can suddenly change her mind and unexpectedly tell her son that he should never get married because a life without obligations suddenly seems safer and calmer to her now. Shocked to the core and momentarily petrified by surprise, Ju Wan-cha exclaimed in horror that his friend must have read too many stupid romance novels to suggest such a ridiculous, strange, and crazy plan of action. When the guy, without wasting any time, began to eat with gusto, bringing the fork to his mouth, his friend suddenly asked with a conspiratorial squint how he himself could find a girl as beautiful, kind, reliable, and unusual as the guy's. With a glass of aromatic wine in his hand, Ju Wan-cha, after much thought, reluctantly agreed to his friend's plan, which seemed stupid and absurd to him, but a logical question arose. Where could he find a girl who would agree to participate in this adventure? His friend, a little embarrassed, shyly scratched the back of his head and, spreading his hands, admitted with a grin that, to tell the truth, he himself did not know where he could find a woman who would agree to appreciate a stubborn man with a difficult character. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of town, a girl with a renewed, unusually attractive appearance sat in the light embrace of her boss and actively helped him implement a cunning plan in which she was assigned an extremely important and difficult role. Ju Wan-cha, bowing his head and watching her with a warm and slightly shy smile, allowed himself to imagine for a few moments what it would be like if Shinara really became his girlfriend, real, magical, and truly loved. His mother froze in absolute shock, looking at the unexpected guest in an elegant dress, and did not even notice how the cup slipped from her trembling hands, and the tea slowly spilled onto the tablecloth. The woman was shocked and did not expect such a scene at all. The lady clearly could not believe her eyes, weakly opening her mouth, because she did not think at all that such an unusual and unfamiliar type of girl with a bright charisma could be to her son's taste, and therefore froze in awkward silence, not knowing how to behave correctly. Unexpectedly for everyone present, Ju Wan-cha confidently, almost demonstratively, took Shinara's hand, firmly and warmly intertwining his fingers with hers, and then slowly and with dignity lifted her from the chair, as if introducing an important person of whom he could be proud even in front of his mother. Embarrassed by the unexpected and affectionate attention, Shin-ara blushed deeply, especially after hearing the gentle, almost dreamy compliment from the man, who with a sincere and deep smile said that she reminded him of the heroine of one hard-working story from his youth. Ju Wan-cha gallantly leaned towards her graceful palm, kissed her softly and respectfully, looking into her eyes with warm tenderness and slight excitement, and quietly, almost in a whisper, said that his feelings were sincere and his intentions towards her were quite serious, mature and conscious, without the slightest hint of a joke or a game. Then, moving away a little and still not letting go of her warm hand, he asked with a sly but slightly embarrassed smile and light irony whether she would be ready to continue dating him and building a relationship, so that perhaps one day they could get to a wedding, a real family, and a strong mutual affection. Shannara blushed deeply, feeling the heat of the blush spreading across her cheeks, and despite her inner turmoil, she understood that this whole scene was part of the boss's cunning plan, because her role was to play along with him, even if her own feelings were starting to get a little out of control. But just as the atmosphere between them was filled with awe, hope, and genuine romance, this exciting moment was abruptly interrupted by the intervention of the man's mother, who anxiously but firmly and worriedly asked them to stop for a bit. After a short pause, the lady with a serious, attentive, and slightly suspicious expression on her face asked the young lovers directly if they were in a hurry to develop their feelings, because true love requires time, patience, and deep confidence in the partner. Shannara herself, wiping away the drool that had involuntarily appeared on her lips and feeling an unbearable heat in her flushed cheeks, realized that she had gotten too carried away by this deception and for a moment actually felt excited, as if she herself could truly fall in love with her boss. Only an hour earlier she had discussed the finer points of their role in a private and rather tense conversation with Ju Wan-cha. Her task was to play the role of a girl in love in front of his strict and picky mother so that she would find fault with her and not consider her a suitable partner for her son. When the moment of deception itself arrived, Shannara froze for a moment, overcome with internal discomfort and awkwardness, because the very thought of deliberately leading someone by the nose was something painfully unpleasant and morally difficult for her. However, when Ju Wan-cha calmly said that such pretense would significantly reduce her personal debt to him, Shannara, almost without thinking, agreed, ready to temporarily step over her own principles for the sake of helping the boss. An awkward and drawn-out silence hung in the air as the girl had previously tried to somehow talk to him about it, but had failed, and tears suddenly began to flow down her face, revealing the depth of her emotional experiences and the inner turmoil that had been tormenting her for a long time. Confused and depressed by her son's difficult and painful choice, his mother, putting her hands on her chest, looked away, sighing heavily, as if trying to collect her various thoughts and find the right words to continue an important and difficult conversation. Suddenly, breaking the heavy silence, she spoke with a serious and anxious tone in her voice, asking what exactly her beloved child's chosen one had been doing lately, and what her true goal and intentions were in her relationship with him. With a slightly embarrassed and timid smile on her face, the girl admitted that she had dedicated her life to writing, trying to convey in words the depth of emotions and experiences which unexpectedly attracted the close attention of the woman present, causing her to freeze for a moment. Surprise froze on the woman's face, her mouth barely closed in surprise, and in this moment of confusion, one could read deep amazement, as if the girl's sudden confession forced her to rethink many long-established ideas and views on what was happening around her. With a hint of disappointment and slight fatigue in her eyes, the mother said that the young man probably reacted so violently and rebelled because his soul had long been tormented by heavy and painful memories, and her gaze was filled with bitterness, sadness, and hidden anger at the same time. The young man froze, motionless, hearing his mother's words, which unexpectedly touched his feelings deeply, causing internal protest and pain, as if these words hurt his soul more than he could express outwardly, causing his heart to beat faster and more anxiously. Suddenly, with a sharp, firm voice, he interrupted the parent's speech, confidently declaring that all this was completely unrelated to the present situation, and his expression became gloomy and sullen, as if reflecting the internal conflict and irritation of trying to discuss the past. Ultimately, the woman, although not without resistance, agreed with her son, admitting that there was no point in digging into the past and reviving old wounds, but firmly stated that the writer, no matter how talented and wonderful a person she was not a suitable life partner for her son. With surprise and slight confusion, Shannara listened to the conversation of the two other people, trying to understand what event and what past they were talking about so seriously, as if a tense conflict had broken out between them, connected with important family experiences and misunderstandings. A heated argument broke out between the relatives, since writers were usually presented as lonely, independent women who were in no hurry to connect their fate with finding a husband, preferring to remain free and self-sufficient in their work and life. With a proud expression on her face and firm confidence, the woman turned away sharply, not wanting to put up with someone else's choice, and decisively declared that this lady was absolutely not suitable for her child, and she was not going to put up with such a prospect, despite all attempts to convince her otherwise. Carefully picking up her small handbag and placing it carefully on her lap, she quietly said that she would pretend that she had not heard anything he had said, trying to remain calm and hide her true feelings from those around her at that moment. Unconsciously, the young and beautiful Shin-ara clenched her fists tightly, clutching the fabric of her dark dress that was lying on her lap, feeling the anger and resentment building up inside her, caused by the unfair treatment and cruel stereotypes of those around her. She felt intense irritation and deep resentment that other people, thinking she was just a writer, automatically assumed she was not ready or willing to have relationships with guys, which deeply hurt her inner world and self-esteem. Indeed, at times she was a little inexperienced and confused, often staying late at work or not getting enough sleep. But despite all these difficulties and fatigue, she still secretly cherished the dream of one day meeting someone to whom she could sincerely and reverently confess her love. Suddenly, as if seized by a burst of determination and inner strength, sweet Shin-ara grabbed a cold glass of drink and ice, smoothly raised it to her lips, and took a few slow, measured sips to calm her excitement for at least a moment and concentrate before the upcoming events. Having finished drinking with a light thud and conscious confidence, she placed the glass back on the table, as if leaving behind all the anxiety and doubts in order to meet the upcoming trials with renewed strength, to show fortitude and inner peace in her soul. The girl's gaze became completely different. It showed arrogance and self-confidence mixed with serene calm, as if she had finally found the inner peace that she had been looking for so long and was ready to boldly look into the future. Previously, Shin-ara was very worried and anxious whenever she received negative reviews for her books, because she was unusually sensitive to the opinions of others, and every caustic word left a painful and long-lasting echo of doubt in her soul. The villain from her novel literally burned with hatred and malice. Readers unanimously described her as a terrible and ruthless character, which gave rise to a storm of criticism and heated debate around the work, which often escalated into fierce and caustic attacks on the author. So, deciding to play the bad girl role and use that image to her advantage, Shin-ara leaned back with a hint of irony in her voice and a sly smile, and asked if, as a writer, she was now deprived of the right to find a partner and build personal relationships like any other person. After that, she confidently and playfully raised her index finger up, as if emphasizing her courage and determination, demonstrating to everyone around her that now it was she who set the tone in the conversation and was ready to defend her position to the end without any doubts. After these words, she declared with a little courage and audacity that if it were not for her, then this unlucky and unremarkable director would hardly ever have been able to find another worthy, suitable couple for himself, capable of truly understanding and sincerely accepting him as he really is. This comment made the man very angry because he felt deeply hurt and criticized, as if all his weaknesses and failures were exposed to everyone, which caused a storm of indignation and internal protest in him, almost causing him to lose self-control and control. Suddenly the lady, as if deciding on a bold and unexpectedly daring act, grabbed the man by the tie, pulling him so close to her that both their hearts began to beat faster, and the atmosphere around them was filled with tension and an unexpected electric charge of their complex but alluring interaction. The man, with obvious shock and deep bewilderment, asked what exactly his ward had been doing, what kind of a real show and stormy troubles she had staged in their house, causing him great concern and confusion regarding her unexpected behavior. The woman, with difficulty holding back her drool from strong surprise and internal indignation, watched as her son's friend began to behave with bold confidence and unpredictable impudence, which became an extremely unexpected and unpleasant surprise for her. With a light and playful smile on her lips, shimmering with sparks of coquetry, she told the guy that perhaps it was time for them to finally start talking about a serious and perhaps even silvery relationship, which it was high time to develop, strengthen, and carefully preserve between them. Some time had passed since that awkward scene, and Shin Ara, holding her breath and feeling her heart beating faster than usual, anxiously awaited a response from her boss, with whom they had played out a rather daring and risky scene right in front of his strict and perceptive mother. Feeling the tension thickening and the inner excitement growing with each passing second, she lowered her head and sadly realized that perhaps in the heat of the moment she had overdone it and allowed herself to say something unnecessary that could seriously affect the entire carefully thought-out plan. His gaze was dark and hard, almost scorching, and there was barely restrained rage in his voice as he, looking at her from under his brows, quietly but forcefully asked what exactly she had allowed herself to do, and Shin Ara, confused with anxiety and slight fear in her eyes, did not know how to answer. With difficulty holding back the tears that were coming, Shin Ara admitted in a quiet and barely audible voice, full of embarrassment and regret, that at that moment she acted rashly, without thinking about the consequences of her words and actions, succumbing to emotions and internal tension. Meanwhile, the lady, it seemed, had not fully grasped their performance, sat with a cup of tea in her hands, as if foaming at the mouth, not understanding what exactly was happening between the young people, and continued to watch them with bewilderment and slight suspicion, not delving into the essence of the moment. Quite unexpectedly, the man, without saying a word or changing his expression, raised his hand and calmly but firmly placed it on the waist of the young Shin Ara, as if wanting to show those present, and especially his mother, that everything that was happening was real and not a game, and in this gesture there was both protection and determination. Stunned by such sudden closeness and an almost provocative gesture, the girl abruptly pulled away from the man, frowning, and opened her mouth in surprise, as if wanting to say something, but the words got stuck in her throat from surprise, internal confusion, slight embarrassment, and nascent protest. The young man at this time looked at her attentively and intently from top to bottom, as if trying to read her thoughts, catch the slightest reaction to his actions, and understand how far he had gone. His gaze was persistent, but not oppressive. In it one could feel a mixture of anxiety, expectation, and subtle regret. There was a momentary silence between them. They looked at each other intently, and then suddenly he spoke up, saying that he had to leave urgently because he had been called to work in the office, and he could not waste another minute. The woman froze in surprise, as if she couldn't believe her ears and didn't know what she should say at such a moment. But before she could formulate a word or make a remark, she was abruptly interrupted, not allowing her to express her sincere reaction. After this, Ju Wancha calmly, but with an uncharacteristic determination and a slight hint of mischief in his voice, promised his mother that he would definitely drop by to visit her soon with his girlfriend, to introduce them properly and dispel all misunderstandings. It was already a soft evening outside. The lights of the big city were gradually lit one after another, creating a cozy atmosphere in which the windows of houses sparkled with warm light, and the streets were filled with the breath of the approaching night and the noise of rare passers-by and cars. The blond man spoke on the phone with a slight, barely perceptible smile on his face, addressing his interlocutor with a gentle reproach that she should not have left the house only at his call, especially if she already had other important things to do, concerns or plans for this busy day. While he was speaking, girls passed by who, having barely noticed the approaching figure, began to whisper among themselves, looking enthusiastically in one direction, and with a slight blush on their cheeks, spoke with admiration about what a handsome young man had just passed them. Intrigued by this unexpected attention, noise and whispers, the blonde slowly turned over his shoulder, wanting to find out who exactly had caused such a stormy and enthusiastic reaction in all the girls passing by, and could not resist a slight, innocent curiosity. Immediately to the right, in his line of sight, a tall, impressive man with impeccable features, luxurious posture, and discreet charm appeared, and next to him walked a girl, just as bright, well-groomed and graceful, that together they looked like a truly desirable, almost ideal and worthy couple. Young Han Sunyi suddenly froze in place when he recognized the man walking in front of him, for it was a familiar face that held many vivid memories and strong emotions in his mind, simultaneously causing mixed feelings of joy and great anxiety. However, despite his obvious acquaintance with the man, he was unable to recognize the lady who walked next to him. Her long blonde hair, fair skin, carefully applied makeup and elegant black dress created an atmosphere of mystery and inaccessibility around her, leaving much in secret. Embarrassed and a little confused, the beauty loudly and slightly irritatedly asked the guy not to do that again, because his behavior and unexpected appearance in such a manner embarrassed her very much and caused awkwardness, which she wanted to hide from those around her. Throwing a short, appraising glance at her, the guy calmly and confidently replied that it was this decisive and timely action that helped them leave without adventures and dangers, so she should sincerely feel gratitude and deep appreciation for his support and help in that difficult situation. The embarrassed and slightly confused girl admitted that she had recently gained weight easily, and the dress was too thin and tight, so she clearly felt every curve of her body and its small but noticeable change, which worried her a little, embarrassed her, and made her nervous. With his hands on his chest, the boss, with a slight ironic smile, reminded his subordinate that it was she who first started playing a risky and dangerous game when she decided to grab him by the tie, thereby provoking an unexpected, tense, and very sharp development of events between them. Suddenly, Shin-ara shuddered sharply, hiding in fear behind the back of her interlocutor, who asked her with alarm and concern what had happened and why she had suddenly become so frightened, noticing that her behavior had become very strange and alarming to everyone around her. Quickly gathering her courage and trying to calm down, she explained that ahead, among the people passing by, someone was staring intently and persistently at her, but she could not understand who exactly, and this feeling of anxiety and uncertainty did not leave her even for a moment. The guy sighed and shook his head, smiling slightly and jokingly, saying that she had probably imagined too much, and all these suspicions were simply a figment of her imagination, caused by the fatigue, stress, and tension of the last few days, and that she urgently needed to relax and unwind a little. He then thought gloomily that it was unlikely that anyone would be interested in his companion, because who would really need her in this huge and cold world where everyone strives for their own goals, not paying attention to others? Shin-ara, feeling slightly embarrassed and awkward, tried to explain that usually her intuition and premonitions never failed her, and that was why now she could not ignore the strange feeling of anxiety that came over her suddenly and without warning. The man, hearing her words and seeing how sweet and beautiful she looked at that moment, suddenly felt a little embarrassed himself, realizing that behind the external confidence there was real vulnerability, and this made him take a new look at the girl next to him. He had just realized that the black dress the girl was wearing was too short, too provocative, and too revealing, as if it was specially designed to attract attention, and this outfit made him worry about her safety and reputation in this place. Without a moment's hesitation, he quickly threw his jacket over her fragile shoulders, trying to cover and hide her naked legs and body, as if protecting her from prying eyes and unwanted comments, in order to maintain her calm and sense of confidence. Despite his concern, the girl protested and insisted that her job required the style and dress she wore, adding that the jacket would not be able to completely hide her legs, but the guy firmly insisted that at least this way it would be a little easier for her to avoid unnecessary glances. Together they headed to a cozy and quiet restaurant to order a delicious and hearty meal. Fresh vegetables and fragrant crispy bacon were already neatly laid out on the table, creating an appetizing and cozy atmosphere, promising a pleasant evening after a long, busy day. Shin-ara ate happily and with pleasure, realizing that this was not just ordinary food from lunch, confidently holding chopsticks in her hand, and a light and sincere smile played on her lips, expressing her inner peace and satisfaction with the moment. With his hand on his face, Ju Wancha frowned and watched his companion attentively as she ate at his expense, not hiding her pleasure, and his gaze reflected a mixture of concern, wariness, and slight irritation, as if he was trying to understand her thoughts and feelings at that very moment. He thoughtfully and attentively watched as she ate calmly, confidently, and without the slightest embarrassment, and Shin-Ara herself felt truly natural and free, allowing herself to be herself in this quiet, cozy, and warm moment in time. The beauty, deftly, with graceful elegance and ease, gathered her hair into a neat ponytail to keep it away from her face and not allow it to interfere with her gaze or the process of eating, as if making sure that nothing distracted her from what was happening around them on this special evening. Suddenly, Ju Wancha spoke in a calm and quiet voice, noting that she had become herself again, real and sincere, and not the one she had tried to appear to be when they first met his mother, when she pretended to be a completely different person for the sake of appearance. Slightly embarrassed and looking down, the lady admitted that in reality she was simply playing the role of a villain from a novel she had written herself, trying to live up to the image, but now she felt relief and lightness from being able to be herself without masks and pretense. Ju Wancha, with a slight hint of sadness and deep understanding, quietly agreed that sometimes the comments and reviews from readers were so cruel and merciless to the author that they left deep wounds in the soul, like sharp arrows, causing fear and self-doubt. Shin-Ara, nervously waving her hands and trying to explain the situation, admitted that she had finally decided to remove the villain from the novel, but soon everyone began to say that the plot had become too bland and boring, devoid of its former fire and dramatic tension, which made her very upset. Using tongs, carefully and with great skill, the handsome Ju Wancha took a small piece of meat from the plate, slowly frying it until golden brown, as if trying to prepare for both of them not just a meal, but a real sign of attention and care on this quiet evening. Surprised and slightly touched, the girl watched attentively as the guy tenderly and carefully looked after her, frying delicious pieces of meat especially for the two of them, which warmed her heart even more and made her feel special and loved. With a smile on his lips and tongs in his hands, Ju Wancha loudly and confidently declared that the writer created what she wanted, without paying attention to anyone and without listening to other people's advice, completely immersing herself in her own vision and creative process without looking back at the opinions of others. These words slightly embarrassed the girl. She awkwardly froze in place, feeling her cheeks covered with a delicate blush because such an unexpected compliment and confession caused her both joy and slight shyness, which made her even more charming. The girl thoughtfully took up the food and carefully, with slight uncertainty, began to eat, deftly using Chinese chopsticks, which gave her movements a special grace and reminded her of the subtleties and beauty of the Eastern culture, which she respected and loved. The man, noticing that the tie was starting to cause discomfort, slowly adjusted and loosened it around his neck so that it would not interfere or restrict his movements, demonstrating concern for his own comfort, and perhaps subtly hinting at a desire to create a more relaxed atmosphere between them. Sweat was slowly trickling down the boy's face and neck, but he looked handsome and collected, carefully tucking his hair back with his hand, and then noticing with a slight smile that the room seemed to have suddenly become much hotter and stuffier, as if the atmosphere was tense with tension and emotion. Shin-Ara, noticing his change, began to eat faster, slightly embarrassedly looking down at the table, feeling a slight excitement and trepidation because he looked too young, but at the same time collected and serious, which made her experience mixed emotions and a slight inner trepidation. Finally, having completed her work at home, she raised her hands in the air with pride and relief, solemnly announcing that she had finished the novel printed on her laptop, feeling satisfaction from the work done and an inner joy from achieving an important and meaningful goal in her creativity. She had spent the entire night writing the book without closing her eyes, completely immersed in her creative process, and now, having finally completed the work, she was sincerely glad that she had made it to the appointed deadline, feeling like a winner in the battle with time and inspiration. After a long and exhausting day, the girl noticed with horror on her face huge and dark circles under her eyes, like heavy shadows of fatigue and sleepless nights, which mercilessly left deep marks, clearly speaking of her endless work, experiences, and emotional upheavals. Next to the comfortable chair stood her spacious and cozy room, filled with personal belongings, mementos, and warm memories, which together created an atmosphere of complete peace and comfort, where she could finally allow herself to rest and collect her thoughts after all the difficulties she had experienced. Shin-ara, feeling tired and relieved, lay down on the soft, cozy bed, hugging the pillow tightly to her chest, thinking that thanks to Ju-won-cha's support and help, she was finally able to finish an important draft of her book, which was a significant achievement. In her female imagination, he looked like a real hot and caring guy who cooked meat for her with love and attention, showing tenderness and support, which warmed her heart and inspired her to further achievements. The beautiful lady lay happily and relaxed on the bed, slowly rolling from side to side and thoughtfully thinking about her boss, who had become not only a support for her, but also a source of unexpected feelings and emotions that she was just beginning to understand. Suddenly her gaze fell on the jacket, hanging neatly on the hanger, which required urgent washing and ironing in order to return it to the boss on time, and at that moment she felt a slight embarrassment and wondered if she had forgotten something important from the things she had so carefully planned. Embarrassed and with a slight blush on her cheeks, Shin-ara wondered what exactly could have slipped from her memory like an invisible shadow of forgotten duties, and this feeling of anxiety made her search for an answer with even greater insistence, not allowing herself to relax. Quickly grabbing the phone in her hand, she began to scroll through the pages of notes and messages with bated breath, trying not to miss a single detail, until her gaze stopped on information that seemed to flash through her thoughts, bringing long-awaited understanding. Finally, Shin-ara found what she had been looking for since the morning, and her heart was filled with surprise and joy, because this brilliant idea, which she had never been able to think of before, now appeared before her in all its simplicity and obviousness, opening up new possibilities. In a small, cozy cafe, where different people sat leisurely at wooden counters and neatly arranged tables, filling the room with quiet conversations and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a calm atmosphere of comfort and warmth was created, as if inviting you to forget about the hustle and bustle of the day. With a light and sincere smile, the female producer carefully studied the work that one of her subordinates had recently handed over to her, feeling deep satisfaction and joy that the result was truly high quality and exceeded all her expectations. On the table in front of her lay a modern tablet with important notes and materials, and next to it stood a neat porcelain plate with an appetizing dessert, enticing with its delicate aroma and the promise of a pleasant break from a busy workday. Looking up from the paper, the girl quietly said that in front of them was not just a draft, but a work with a completely different mood and depth, sharply different in style and meaning from the previous book of the same writer, causing surprise and admiration. Shin-ara froze in shock for a moment, realizing that the conversation was not only about her book, but also about her herself. After all, she had changed her appearance and became a real beauty, which was reflected in her work, making it deeper and more soulful, causing complex feelings and excitement inside. These words unexpectedly confused the young girl, and she quickly began to get ready, trying not to show her confusion. But having received approval and support from the producer regarding her work, she felt a surge of confidence and pride in what she had achieved. When the conversation turned to whether the person who inspired her was truly important to her work and influenced her inner changes, Shin-ara's eyes widened in surprise, as if she had not expected such a direct question and the deep insight of her interlocutor. Waving her hands in front of her with slight confusion and trying to explain herself, she began to justify herself by saying that the man had simply helped her by becoming the prototype of the main character and nothing more, without influencing her personal life or feelings, only inspiring her to create. Then, with a noticeable blush on her cheeks, she added that she had not even had any special relationships or romantic feelings, emphasizing that all this was just a figment of her imagination and writer's fantasy and did not go beyond the scope of her professional work. The night city around was enveloped in the soft light of street lamps. The houses stood tall and majestic, and the streets, illuminated by neon, stretched far up and into the distance, creating an atmosphere of mystery and magic, ideal for creative inspiration and new ideas. The girl objected with slight insistence when her companion tried to give her his jacket, explaining that it was too heavy and uncomfortable for her, not wanting to burden her, although his concern was sincere and touching, despite the surrounding conversations. Meanwhile, other passers-by were judging the man, whispering among themselves that he was being too pushy and pestering the girl, not noticing how sweat was slowly trickling down the man's face, and his mouth was open in surprise and alarm at the rumors that were beginning to spread around them with alarming speed. Sweat slowly trickled down the man's face as he stood there with his mouth open, as if stunned and confused, and around them there were already various rumors and gossip that quickly spread and made those around them pay more and more attention to them, creating an atmosphere of tension. Suddenly, he abruptly placed his hands on the fragile female's shoulders, insistently and seriously asking her to listen to him very carefully, because now everything depended on her decision. And although the girl looked incredibly beautiful and attractive, doubt was growing inside her, like a secret signal for caution. With a blush on his face, the man quietly said that now many people were watching her with curiosity and attention, and that was why she should cover herself and not attract unnecessary glances, because public opinion and condemnation can be much harsher than it seems at first glance. Understanding suddenly overtook the girl because she had seen something similar before on TV, when beautiful girls became the object of jealousy on the part of their boyfriends, and now she realized that she found herself in a similar situation, where external beauty sometimes brings not only admiration, but also difficulties. However, after some time she realized that everything was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. The man really understood fashion, and therefore gave her clothes a size larger, like oversize, to emphasize the style and create a special image. Sitting on a soft bed in a cozy house, Shin Ara began to carefully search for new clothes for the director, wanting to choose exactly the outfit that he would really like and that would match his refined taste, as well as emphasize his status and individuality. She carefully thought out every element of her wardrobe because before returning the things to the boss, she wanted to show off her updated image to the blonde, her secret lover, to unexpectedly surprise him and leave a deep impression that would remain in his memory for a long time. Scratching her head thoughtfully, the girl admitted with a smile that everything worked out for her precisely thanks to the inspiration and advice of the main character's prototype, whose help and support played a decisive role in her transformation and confidence. Her producer noted with joy and sincere admiration that the new novel turned out to be much better, brighter, and deeper than the previous work, emphasizing the significant progress and creative growth of the writer, which caused sincere satisfaction and pride in the joint efforts and the result. Suddenly, the woman looked up with great interest and attention as her assistant began talking about the beginning of their important joint project, opening up new perspectives and possibilities, filling the room with energy, inspiration, and hope for a successful continuation of the work. Insistently and with a little anxiety, but sincerely, Shin Ara admitted that she would like to apologize to him if only she knew where he was now, because in her soul there was a sincere request for forgiveness and a desire to restore the lost trust and closeness. The food on the plate was almost completely eaten, leaving only small crumbs and barely noticeable traces, indicating that this simple but cozy and pleasant lunch had come to an end, leaving a slight feeling of satisfaction and a pleasant aftertaste. Thoughtfully and with a slight concern, the producer stated that usually their director was always in the office on business and always available, but recently he began to disappear often without explanation, causing everyone to worry and ask about the reasons for his absence. Shinara was deeply surprised by such an unexpected statement and listened with bated breath to the producer's story, trying to understand what could have happened and why the director suddenly changed his usual behavior, which caused her mixed feelings of anxiety and curiosity. The new day greeted the city with freshness and clarity. Green trees gently swayed in the wind, snow-white buildings shone in the bright sun, and the streets were filled with calm and anticipation of new events, creating an atmosphere of lightness and inspiration. With a bag in her hands and a slightly embarrassed expression on her face, the girl stood at the entrance to the huge university, feeling unsure and hesitant, her heart pounding in anticipation, because she didn't know if she should go inside and start a new chapter of her life. Only the most stylish and elegant people walked slowly around her, literally sparkling with their impeccable beauty and confidence, like bright stars, illuminating the space around them and causing admiration in every passerby, not going unnoticed. The upset and agitated lady began to rush about and spin nervously, plunging into her confused thoughts, tormented by doubts and worries, as if trying to find answers to questions that were haunting her, desperately trying to gather her strength and find peace. She lowered her head and took a deep breath, suddenly realizing that while she had been completely immersed in her work as a writer and settling into her new position, she had not noticed what was happening around her at all, as if she had been closed off from the outside world and lost in her own worries and experiences, which upset her a little. However, Ju Wan-cha, as she had previously admitted, looked a little embarrassed, but still noted that Shin-ara's new look gave her an extraordinary external appeal and freshness that was immediately noticeable and made her irresistible and memorable. Deep in her thoughts, Shin-ara was completely unaware of the young men passing by her, casting loving glances in her direction, full of tenderness and admiration, as if she was the center of their attention and inspiration at that very moment. And what was her shock and surprise when the producer suddenly told her that the director had been absent from the office for a long time, which caused her internal discomfort and made her think about the possible reasons for this sudden disappearance and changes in his behavior. Thoughtfully, sitting in a chair and immersed in her own thoughts, the lady suggested that perhaps it was because of her that the boss stopped showing up at the office, and this idea caused her both anxiety and guilt, forcing her to reconsider her behavior and relationship with him. Suddenly, a familiar blonde man appeared on the horizon, confidently walking down the street in modern, stylish clothes, radiating charisma and calmness, which immediately attracted Shin-ara's attention and caused a storm of emotions and unexpected memories associated with this man. It was Han Sunyi, a young man with beautiful pale skin and a deep, expressive gaze, who carefully examined the surroundings, as if trying to find something important and hidden somewhere nearby, causing a slight sense of mystery and intrigue in those around him. Ju Wan-cha, feeling a strange and inexplicable sensation, suddenly froze, lowered his head, and opened his eyes wide, as if trying to understand what exactly caused this unusual wave of anxiety and excitement that permeated his mind and body, as if warning him of something important and unknown. He was working hard in his blue kitchen, immersed in his work on his laptop, when he suddenly turned back sharply, as if he sensed the presence of someone important or heard a sound that instantly caught his attention and made him forget about everything else around him. There was not a soul around, only a snow-white ceiling with elegant chandeliers illuminating the emptiness of the room with a cold light, creating a feeling of serenity and at the same time a slight anxiety permeating every cell of the space. He put his hand on his neck and thought, feeling goosebumps of fear and deep inner tension run through his entire body, as if an invisible wave of anxiety had engulfed him from within, making his heart beat faster and his thoughts get confused in his head, covering his entire consciousness. He abruptly placed his hand on the table next to the equipment, his fingers involuntarily clenching into a fist, showing internal tension and a firm determination that fought against the impending fear, as if preparing for the inevitable and unknown test waiting around the corner. The refrigerator door was slightly open, and cans of soda were visible inside, the cold light from inside beckoning with its fresh coolness, contrasting with the anxiety that hung in the air of the stuffy and tensely expectant room, as if heralding change. Taking one of the cans in his hands, Ju Wan-cha carefully opened its lid and took a few slow sips of the refreshing drink, enjoying the coolness that gently enveloped his throat and brought short-term relief on a hot and stressful day. After that, having finally found a truly comfortable and cozy place, he sat down on a soft sofa, spreading his legs wide apart to relax as much as possible and allow his body to fully rest, to free itself from the tension accumulated during the day, which constrained his movements and thoughts for long hours. In the distant past, his mother had scolded him harshly and mercilessly, loudly and demandingly accusing him of disgracing her in front of everyone, and her words had penetrated deep into his soul, causing him to painfully worry and doubt every action and choice he had made, which now seemed wrong. She was then overcome with great distress and deep bitterness, seeing in his behavior and in the fact that he had chosen a completely different girl, a betrayal of all those hopes and bright expectations that she had placed on her son with love and trepidation since childhood and youth. After which he abruptly lowered his head, feeling a deep fatigue and heaviness in his body, as if all his strength had left him at once, and every thought became painfully viscous, as if he could barely stand on his feet under the heavy burden of experiences and internal tension, not giving himself a minute of rest. Suddenly his attention was drawn to something strange, unusual, and even alarming, which made him turn his head sharply in that direction, as if he expected to see or hear something important and unpredictable, capable of radically changing the course of events and filling the moment with deep meaning. His phone suddenly rang, a loud, insistent beep that broke the silence of the room and immediately captured his full attention, not giving him a second to think, as if the call carried an important message or foreshadowed changes. He froze, sitting on the bed, when he suddenly realized that it was the writer calling, and a strong question arose in his heart. What exactly did she want from him? What secret words, thoughts, or news could change their relationship or fundamentally affect their complex and confusing history together? After which he abruptly threw the phone aside, categorically not intending to accept this call, as if trying to distance himself from everything that could come from the other side, and thereby maintain peace of mind, despite the looming tension and uncertainty. He calmly continued drinking his soda, looking into the distance with a peaceful and thoughtful look, remembering those rare moments when she was unusually seductive and confident in her new image. By showing unusual courage and sincere openness in her communication with him, she was able to simultaneously evoke admiration and slight surprise, forcing everyone who observed their conversation to feel a special atmosphere of trust and respect. And it was so sweet how she threw his jacket on the stove, slowly and with a slight smile, after which she took his hand and led him with her to a restaurant where they were going to enjoy delicious food and spend time together, forgetting about the worries and bustle of everyday life. Remembering her, he involuntarily spat out the water, almost choking, holding back the laughter that was escaping, because thoughts of her seemed to not leave him for a moment, filling his mind with tenderness and slight anxiety, not giving him peace either day or night. Slowly and reluctantly, Ju Wan-cha stood up from the sofa and headed towards the door, while he was overcome with a slight anxiety and curiosity about who could come to him at such a late hour, when the city is usually shrouded in silence and darkness, creating a feeling of solitude and important peace. He slowly reached out to the intercom to turn on the camera, his movements precise and confident, as if he wanted to capture every moment and carefully monitor everything that was happening behind the door, anticipating an important meeting. Turning on the intercom camera, he cautiously asked who exactly was standing at the door, preparing to see anyone but the girl he was already thinking about in his soul, and switched all his attention to the world around him, although, despite this, his gaze was cold and distant, as if he was not going to notice anyone around him. The blonde walked confidently forward, focused on his important business, not being distracted by the world around him, as if his every move was carefully thought out and aimed at achieving his goals without the slightest delay. He smoothly took off his headphones, barely noticeably holding his gaze, when suddenly his old acquaintance appeared in front of him, causing a flood of memories in his soul and an unexpected feeling of unexpected joy and light nostalgia. However, he did not pay the slightest attention to the main character, did not meet her gaze, and, as if not knowing her at all, calmly and indifferently passed by, as if there were no connections or memories between them, leaving behind only a light aroma of mystery and unpredictability. Shinara, without losing her composure and with a slight hope in her heart, began to quickly and persistently run around him, sincerely hoping that he would finally pay attention to her, but all her efforts were in vain and did not bring any results. After this, the girl realized with surprise and slight confusion that he simply did not recognize her and mistook her for a completely unfamiliar passerby, which caused her mixed feelings and slight disappointment, forcing her to think about how much their relationship had changed. Suddenly the girl stopped unexpectedly, as if frozen in midair, when he finally noticed her and froze in place, as if time around them slowed down for a moment, creating a tense and touching atmosphere of anticipation and foreboding, filled with slight excitement. In front of her stood a man with a slight blush on his cheeks, clearly interested and enchanted by her presence, and without a second's hesitation, he resolutely and confidently approached her to introduce himself, showing sincere concern and warm attention to the stranger who had suddenly become the center of his world. Raising his head sheepishly and meeting his gaze, he quietly said that he had seen her fall and was therefore genuinely worried about her condition, which caused Shinara to instantly become confused and gloomy, as if memories and fears had suddenly come flooding back to her with renewed vigor. After an instant realization, the lady suddenly realized that in front of her was the same embarrassed guy who had previously pestered her in the evening and suddenly disappeared, leaving her in complete bewilderment and slight fear, causing her heart to beat faster from unexpected memories of that disturbing night. She shuddered in horror, dumbfounded, realizing that he did not recognize her at all, and now with undisguised interest and persistence asked her for her phone number, which caused the girl internal discomfort and almost brought her to panic, forcing her to waver in her decision. When the girl was already preparing to fall into despair, not knowing what to do next and feeling anxiety squeezing her chest, they were suddenly interrupted by a strange voice coming from the side, as if abruptly tearing the pause in their tense dialogue and introducing a note of surprise. There, nearby, stood his girlfriend with a perky smile, who reminded the young man with a slight mockery that he had previously planned to meet their mutual old friend, bringing a new dynamic to the situation and changing the course of events, making everyone tense up. The girl quickly realized that the guy next to her was clearly going to get the stranger's phone number, and this caused her obvious disappointment, which was immediately visible on her face, reflecting an internal feeling of dissatisfaction and slight regret that appeared unexpectedly. Shinara, standing nearby, watched their squabble attentively with noticeable awkwardness and slight embarrassment, feeling like an unnecessary participant in this tense and uncomfortable scene that was about to escalate into a serious conflict or deep misunderstanding. Realizing that the situation was starting to become too tense and could lead to unpleasant consequences, she decisively raised her voice, gently but firmly informing that it was time for her to leave, trying to defuse the situation and avoid further unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. The man suddenly intervened in the conversation, insistently demanding that the stranger give him her phone number, trying to convince her to give in to his request despite her obvious reluctance, creating a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere between all participants in the dialogue. However, in the midst of their argument, a blonde man suddenly appeared and rushed to intervene to insist that she already had a boyfriend and that he shouldn't waste his time and energy trying to start a relationship with her, adding a defensive and jealous tone to the conversation. The sweet young man began to anxiously ask his friend questions, trying to understand how he knew about the girl's boyfriend, and heard in response that he had already seen them together before, which confirmed the truth of his words and increased the tension between them. At this point, their friend also noted that she felt like she had seen this girl somewhere before, which further complicated the situation and added an element of mystery and curiosity to what was happening, forcing everyone to listen carefully and watch around. Shin-ara watched the conversation of her old acquaintances with interest and slight anxiety, who, to her surprise, did not even recognize her, as if she had become a complete stranger to them, lost in the flow of time and distant memories, forgotten and invisible. The blonde, noticing her gaze, cast an interested and soft smiling look in her direction, full of warm curiosity, which seemed to be trying to discern something more than just a stranger in a crowd of passers-by, as if something familiar and dear. Deciding to play the role of a stranger and keep the secret, Shin-ara waved her hand slightly as a farewell, adding that it was indeed time for her to leave, as if hiding behind this simple gesture a whole storm of feelings and unspoken words that could not find an outlet at that moment. The city around was coming to life. Tall buildings soared into the sky, tree branches swayed gently between them, and the air was filled with the fresh smell of asphalt and coolness, creating a special atmosphere of urban beauty and the continuous movement of life that never stops. Shin-ara rushed to leave with a quick step, trying to quickly get away and forget herself, when suddenly from behind she was unexpectedly stopped by a soft but persistent alien voice, which sounded quite unexpectedly and penetratingly, forcing her to freeze and turn around sharply, seized by sudden excitement. It was Han Sunyi, a young man with a small bag in his hands, who quietly followed her all the way, as if he did not want to miss the moment to finally talk to her in person and explain everything that had accumulated in his heart over this long time, full of doubts and expectations. The lady instinctively reached out for her thing, realizing with alarm and slight concern that she had forgotten it there, in the very place she had left, and now began to fear that she had lost something important and dear, something that could mean a lot to her and influence her future destiny. Suddenly, the guy leaned a little closer to her and quietly said that, despite her new look and carefully applied makeup, he still recognized her as his old friend, whom he remembered from the past, with all her secrets, feelings, and experiences that they shared together. He was deeply impressed by how a person can change dramatically, simply by putting on new clothes and applying careful makeup, as if discovering a completely different, previously unknown side of his personality, capable of surprising and attracting the eye. Shin-ara opened her mouth in surprise and slight excitement when she suddenly realized that he recognized her despite her carefully applied makeup, and the soft red blush on her cheeks only emphasized this unexpected and touching meeting, awakening a mixture of shame and joy in her. She was clearly embarrassed when they started giving her sincere compliments, and, not knowing what to do with herself, she nervously scratched the back of her head with her hand, trying to hide her excitement, confusion, and uncertainty in the face of unexpected attention, to which she was not at all accustomed, and which caused a storm of emotions in her. The man confirmed with genuine surprise that he was truly stunned and amazed to see her in such an unexpected, bright and attractive image, which was radically different from the usual, reserved and modest style to which he had long been accustomed, and which he considered her calling card. When he first noticed her with a man walking confidently next to him, he couldn't immediately recognize her. She had changed so much, not only in appearance but also in the graceful manner of holding herself, in her gait, in every movement, and even in the subtle nuances of her facial expression, that she genuinely impressed him. After a short and awkward pause, Han Sunyi waved his hand with a slight, almost apologetic smile, and admitted that at first he even thought that the guy was her lover who was cheating on her, and at that moment his heart was painfully squeezed with jealousy, mistrust, and fear of losing her completely. Shin-ara suddenly realized that her childhood friend was talking to her in a particularly polite and reserved manner, as if she were almost a stranger to him, which seemed strange and a little offensive to her, because before there had been no walls or pretense between them, only ease and trust. But everything changed when he suddenly noticed in her hands that same white bag with a hand-drawn heart, a familiar drawing that he himself had once given her long ago, playing with her in the yard, and at that moment his eyes flashed with a recognizing light in which surprise, joy, and nostalgia were mixed. And Shin-ara, clutching that very thing in her hands, as if protecting it, stood in complete shock, realizing that he, despite the years of separation and change, still remembered such a small thing about her. that very detail that she herself had almost forgotten, but which, as it turned out, had great significance for him. Folding his arms across his chest, Han Sunyi said loudly that it was really rude of her not to remember him, because he had also been sitting next to her in the cafe, listening carefully to her voice, looking into her eyes and trying to remember every little detail of their short, but in his opinion, important meeting. Wearily sitting down on a bench at the bus stop, Shin-Ara put her large bag down next to her, dropping her umbrella in the process, and sighed loudly, pursing her lips and clenching her fingers, as if trying to contain the growing irritation, despair, and strange inner excitement that had suddenly come upon her. She silently rolled her eyes and snorted in annoyance, thinking that she shouldn't have come to the university on this ridiculous day at all. It would have been much wiser and safer to stay home in peace, with a cup of tea, a book, and a cozy blanket, and avoid all this emotional chaos. Wiping away her tears with the corner of her lace handkerchief, with an awkward but warm smile, she thought that Han Sunyi now most likely thought of her as a simple-minded, naive girl who thoughtlessly went out with different guys, got into stupid situations, and could not stand up for herself seriously. Taking off her wig with slight irritation, she carefully put it in her bag and promised herself never to wear this accessory again, as if it were a symbol of something unnecessary that only prevented her from being herself and feeling inner freedom. Despite her irritation, deep down she was pleased to hear sincere compliments from men who knew how to say warm and tender words, as if illuminating her day with rays of sunshine, giving confidence and filling her heart with a light joy that was difficult to forget. She folded her arms across her chest and thought deeply about whether she should reveal the whole truth about her true nature to her childhood friend, since it was unlikely that he would be able to remain the same and not change his opinion of her if he learned all the secrets hidden behind her new appearance and image. Suddenly, the harsh words of her boss Ju Wan-cha came to mind, who, in a fit of rage, shouted loudly, demanding that she deal with the rumors being spread herself without involving him in these problems, which caused her to feel both offended and internally protest, strengthening her doubts. Suddenly, a bright inspiration struck her, and grabbing the phone with a little excitement, she decided to call her boss immediately to ask for permission to take the day off, explaining that she needed to sort out an important idea for an important job. The girl dialed the editor's number and confidently said that she had an important question regarding the prototype of the main character, hoping to receive valuable advice and the necessary support that would help her move forward in creating the plot and reveal the character more deeply. Ahead of us stood a huge building with a snow-white staircase leading upward, as if inviting us to enter a world of possibilities and discoveries where every step promised new ideas and inspiration, filling the heart with hope and a slight excitement before the upcoming changes. Ju Wan-cha was standing by the window in his spacious hallway, thoughtfully looking out at the city, when his new neighbor suddenly appeared in front of him with a smile on her face and a gift in her hands, cheerfully telling him that she had just recently moved into this house and sincerely wanted to make friends with him. Putting her hand to her face in slight confusion, she began to explain that she had never had close friends or a boyfriend before, but now she would not mind getting to know Ju Wan-cha better, hoping for a friendly and sincere conversation that could lead to the start of a new relationship. However, a completely opposite mood suddenly appeared on his face, a gloomy and sullen expression that clearly demonstrated his inner irritation and reluctance to enter into any conversation, as if he wanted to avoid any useless discussions. Suddenly, the lady approached Ju Wan-cha to a very short distance, her voice soft but with lively interest, as she carefully asked if he really lived alone in his spacious apartment, hoping to start a casual conversation and make him smile. At the most unexpected and inconvenient moment, Ju Wan-cha's mail phone rang. On the other end of the line was his subordinate, with an important and urgent question that required immediate attention and solution, which instantly interrupted his short dialogue with his new neighbor. Despite the lady's friendly and persistent offers to spend some time together, the man restrainedly but decisively refused, explaining that he really had very important things to do and obligations that did not allow him to stay late and be distracted from work. The floor in the passageway near the office was covered with perfectly laid snow-white tiles, its surface radiating a slight glow under the bright light, creating an atmosphere of strict cleanliness and neatness, emphasizing the status and order in this business space. The young man continued to insistently invite his new neighbor to go on a date together, but suddenly fell silent and froze when his gaze fell on another unexpected guest who appeared in the doorway, bringing with him the shadow of the past and many unanswered questions. It was his old acquaintance, Shin Ara, who was standing nearby in simple, casual clothes, with a bag casually thrown over her shoulder, as if fate itself had decided to remind him of itself at the most unexpected moment, filling the space with a slight excitement. Shin Ara was wearing glasses that gave her an especially intelligent appearance, and the expression of surprise on her face indicated that she had never expected to see her boss in the company of a young girl, which caused her to have mixed feelings and a slight feeling of excitement. The surprised neighbor froze for a moment, not expecting such a polite but firm hint that he was not at all interested in superficial or boorish acquaintances, and that her appearance in this circle was a surprise for everyone, causing slight tension and awkwardness. Ju Wan-cha explained in detail to the visitor that she had come to visit him without prior warning, and added that his girlfriend was deeply jealous, which often complicated their relationship and forced him to carefully avoid any unnecessary meetings and potential conflicts. After that, he quickly returned to his room, carefully closing the door behind him, finding himself alone with an old acquaintance, trying in this way to get rid of the annoying attention of the curious neighbor, who continued to persistently try to attract his attention. After this, he slowly and carefully turned to the girl, sincerely apologizing for the harsh and thoughtless words he had said earlier, realizing that he had rushed to conclusions and now wanted to make up for his mistake with sincere regret and a soft, attentive tone. He tried to justify himself and explain himself to her, gently and delicately explaining that he did not want to hurt her feelings, while she unexpectedly admitted that she really was a very jealous girl, which added sincerity and touchingness to their confidential, honest conversation. Ju Wan-cha awkwardly and slightly embarrassedly confirmed that they were indeed playing the role of a couple now, pretending to be in love to hide the true circumstances and avoid unnecessary questions, which created a strange but necessary pretense between them to maintain peace. Embarrassed, Shinara blushed and covered her face with her hand and quietly replied, trying to emphasize and explain that they were really just pretending, playing their roles, and there was nothing real between them except this small and temporary game for those around them. Ju Wan-cha felt like he was pierced by lightning from his companion's sudden and sharp words, causing his eyes to open wide in surprise and inner shock, as if the whole world around him had frozen in tense silence for a moment. The room was immersed in semi-darkness, in the minimalist style of which only an old TV and a modest shelf stood out, creating an atmosphere of privacy and thoughtfulness, where each object seemed to keep its own history and quietly tell of past events. The young man, sitting nearby on the sofa, slowly and thoroughly explained to the lady, who was lost in her thoughts, the entire difficult situation that had happened to him, and spoke in detail about how persistent and intrusive his neighbor had been, bringing unexpected changes and worries into his life. Raising his hand in a sign of pause and reflection, Ju Wan-cha seriously noted that he still couldn't understand what exactly Shin Ara herself was doing here, and most importantly, why she didn't come to him directly, leaving a feeling of incompleteness and slight anxiety in his soul. After which he slowly and confidently raised his head, with a slight pressure in his voice expressing the thought that she, apparently, really became worried and confused when she openly admitted to a strange lady that there really was a relationship between them, which caused her mixed and contradictory feelings. Shin Ara listened with surprise and attention to the words of her boss, who warned that if she really starts to fall in love sincerely, then he will quickly cease to be her prototype of the main character, and their relationship may soon change dramatically. Ju Wan-cha sincerely hoped and believed that the words he said would not sound too harsh, offensive, or rude, and would not hurt or offend the feelings of the writer, because his main goal was to gently and delicately warn her, maintaining respect and trust in their difficult conversation. But, Contrary to all his expectations and assumptions, what he said did not upset the lady at all. On the contrary, she suddenly, joyfully, and decisively exclaimed that in this case a real friendly war of neighbors would begin between them, full of funny and unusual adventures and cheerful situations. She quickly grabbed a clean sheet of paper and decided to immediately write down this unexpected idea that immediately came to her mind as a wonderful and inspiring plot for a future novel, because in every little thing you can find real inspiration for creating a unique story. The man was genuinely surprised that she still carried a laptop with her at all times, to which she responded with a light and kind smile that she never knew in advance when a sudden stream of inspiration and creative thoughts would come, and therefore was always ready to write down any unexpected thought or vivid image that arose. Lowering his head and taking a deep breath, Ju-won-cha finally realized with a slight sadness and surprise that she had not come to visit him by chance, but with a specific and deliberate purpose, to complete work on her new novel, using it as a source of inspiration and reliable support. The lady happily and sincerely confirmed that she wrote much better and much faster in his presence, because he became a real source of inspiration for her and a muse for the main character of her future novel, which gave her strength and confidence. After that, Shin-ara slowly and with some timidity rose from her seat, went to her bag, and carefully began to take out his thing from there, quietly explaining that she decided to come in person to return it to him, since it was very important and absolutely necessary for her. Inside the neatly folded black bag was his jacket, which she carefully and with great care washed, trying to return the thing to its former neat appearance, thereby showing her deep respect and sincere care, despite all the difficulties and misunderstandings between them. Taking the jacket in her hands, Shin-ara explained that he had not answered his calls before, so she decided to come and return the item herself to avoid any misunderstandings and to show her responsibility to him. Ju-won-cha responded rather rudely and sharply, without any attempt to soften his words, stating that he did not need the clothes at all, and strongly advised Shin-ara to take them and leave as soon as possible, adding coldly and with obvious irritation that he did not want to have any more connections with this matter. The bag with the jacket was thrown by him alone on the sofa, like a forgotten and useless object, which further emphasized his irritated, distant, and cold mood, clearly expressing his desire to end this unpleasant and uncomfortable conversation as soon as possible, leaving everything behind. Despite this, the joyful and determined Shin-ara, calmly and with a slight smile, answered that if he did not want this thing and he really did not need it, then it would be better for him to give this jacket to one of the other girls who might find it useful and bring joy. However, the stubborn Ju-won-cha persistently refused such an idea, categorically stating that this was absolutely not an option, and even asked her to keep the thing, hinting that he no longer wanted to have any further conversations or relations on this topic. Shin-ara understood his words in her own way and decided to support him, thinking to herself that she also had few true friends like him. The man awkwardly turned away, but then tried to explain himself again, and Shin-ara still understood him differently despite his words. The woman's hands tightly clutched the bag resting on her lap, as if it contained an important secret or a bright hope that could change the course of events, despite all the internal tension and emotional complexity of this difficult moment. Suddenly, she carefully took out several products from her bag, fish and drinks with vitamins, as if she wanted to sincerely offer the man care and attention, hoping in this way to soften their cold and tense communication a little, as well as restore at least a drop of trust between them. Adjusting her glasses carefully with her finger, Shin-ara slowly held the fish up, proudly declaring that this product was very beneficial for the health of the skin and was able to give it radiance and elasticity, which made her feel genuinely satisfied and confident that she had made the right choice. The man jerked back in slight confusion when he was handed a container of food, with stern orders to eat it as quickly as possible, otherwise the fish would spoil and become unfit for consumption, which caused him obvious irritation and slight displeasure. Sitting awkwardly opposite the lady, he admitted that he felt uncomfortable accepting food and drinks from her because it seemed too personal and unexpected a gesture, which he was not ready for in this situation, which added to his internal embarrassment and slight confusion. Shin-ara herself felt a little embarrassed and confused when she realized that raw fish steaks cannot be eaten because they must first be properly cooked to avoid health problems and to truly enjoy the food, which left her a little confused. However, the guy silently stood up from his seat, took the bag of food, and headed to the kitchen, calmly and confidently reassuring her with the words that he would cook everything himself so that she would not worry and could trust him completely, demonstrating concern and a desire to help without unnecessary conversations. The girl persistently tried to convince everyone that she should be the one to cook the fish, showing determination, but the guy, with firmness and calmness in his voice, strictly ordered her to sit quietly in place and not interfere in any matters in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. They calmed her down and convinced her with confident words that the person who should cook the fish should be the one who has seen it live at least once, understands all the subtleties and features of the process, because it is experience and knowledge that help to cook the dish perfectly with respect for the product and traditions. So, while Shin-ara was busy typing on her laptop, the young man quietly stood up, headed to the kitchen and started cooking fish with asparagus, putting all his energy and attention into the process, filling the room with the aromas of home comfort and care. The fish, along with fresh asparagus, was grilled on the stove, emitting an aroma that slowly filled the room, causing appetite and anticipation of a hearty and delicious lunch, prepared with love and careful attention to each ingredient, carefully selected for this dish. Shin-ara silently watched her boss, as if seeing her own fatigue and hunger reflected in him, and in that silence a quiet understanding and mutual respect was born between them, as if an invisible thread connected them despite all the difficulties and misunderstandings.